At our family barbecue, my selfish sister sneered at my husband. A carpenter. Please, when will you ever get a real career? The entire patio went silent. Then her husband slowly set down his glass, looked her dead in the eye, and said something that left her completely speechless. My name is Cassidy. I am 33 years old, and until that sunny Saturday, I spent my life biting my tongue. I run a boutique real estate brokerage, and my husband Elijah is the founder of a premier historical estate restoration firm. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The afternoon started like every gathering at my parents' suburban estate. My mother Diana and my father Harrison were busy entertaining their wealthy country club friends by the pool. My younger sister Audrey was the undeniable star of their show. At 31, she was a public relations director who spent more time curating her fake social media presence than actually working. She loudly bragged about her firm moving into a prestigious new office building downtown. Elijah and I stood near the grill, keeping to ourselves. He was wearing his usual weekend attire of a worn flannel shirt and heavy work boots. He likes to personally oversee his high-end restoration sites, rather than sitting behind a desk. My family always hated that about him. Audrey strutted over to us holding a crystal wine glass, her fake smile firmly in place. She looked Elijah up and down with obvious disgust. She asked if he was planning to fix the backyard fence while he was here, since he was already dressed like the hired help. I felt my face flush with anger, but Elijah just smiled politely. Honestly, Cassidy, I do not know how you stand it, she announced, her voice dripping with condescension. You run a real estate business, and your husband is just a glorified carpenter. When will you ever get a real career, Elijah? It is embarrassing for the family to explain what you do to our friends. We are over here making real moves in the corporate world while you are playing with sawdust. The patio went completely silent. My mother Diana covered her mouth to hide a proud smirk, while my father Harrison simply took a slow sip of his drink, looking amused. They had always treated me as the family scapegoat, and they loved watching Audrey put me in my place. I opened my mouth to defend my husband, but someone else beat me to it. Devin stepped forward. Devin is a brilliant African-American corporate and tax attorney. Over the years, he and I shared many knowing glances about the highly toxic behavior of this family, but he usually kept the peace for her sake. Today, however, Devin had clearly reached his limit. He walked over to the patio table and calmly set down his glass of bourbon, looking at his wife with cold authority. Audrey, you might want to watch your tone, Devin said, his deep voice carrying clearly across the silent yard. The carpenter you just insulted is actually the owner of the elite development group that bought your office building yesterday. In fact, Elijah is your new landlord. The color instantly drained from Audrey's face. She stared at Devin in sheer panic, then turned her wide eyes toward Elijah. Elijah simply took another sip of his water and gave Audrey a brief confirming nod. I own the property group that finalized the acquisition of the downtown commercial district on Friday, Elijah stated calmly. Your public relations firm currently leases the entire fourth floor of my building. Audrey's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The humiliation of realizing she had just publicly insulted the man who literally owned the roof over her failing business was absolute. I expected an immediate apology. Any normal person would have begged for forgiveness. But my family was far from normal. My mother Diana immediately rushed forward, her heels clicking aggressively on the stone patio. She completely ignored the cruel insult Audrey had hurled and instead pointed a trembling finger at Elijah. Why did you not tell us you had that kind of money? Diana shrieked, abandoning her refined persona for pure greed. You let us think you were struggling. This is deceitful, Elijah. And since you are the new owner, you need to do the right thing for your sister-in-law right now. Audrey has been having a hard time lately. You must forgive her $50,000 in past due rent immediately because we are family. I stared at my mother in pure shock. Audrey was $50,000 behind on rent, and my mother was demanding that my husband absorb the massive financial loss. They wanted us to pay for Audrey's mistakes, just like always. Elijah looked at Diana with a steady gaze. I am sorry, Diana, but I run a business, not a charity. Audrey signed a commercial lease and she is legally bound by those terms. The past due balance remains, and it is due at the end of the month. My father Harrison slammed his fist down on the patio table, rattling the expensive crystal glasses. The sharp sound echoed across the yard like a gunshot. He marched over to us, his face purple with unhinged rage. Fine, Harrison shouted, while pointing his angry finger directly at my chest. If you want to play hardball with family and act like you owe us nothing, then I will show you exactly how this works. I am calling the bank first thing Monday morning, Cassidy. I will pull my guarantor signature on your brokerage credit line. Let us see your little real estate business survive the night without my name backing you up. Monday morning hit with the brutal reality of my father's threat. I arrived at my real estate brokerage early, eager to shake off the toxic residue of the weekend barbecue. I had a closing scheduled for noon and needed to wire a significant earnest money deposit from my escrow account to the title company. I logged into my commercial banking portal, typed in my credentials, and waited for the dashboard to load. Instead of my usual balances, a stark red banner flashed across the screen. Access denied. Account frozen. I refreshed the page, assuming it was a system glitch. The same red banner glared back at me. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I immediately dialed my dedicated business banker, but his assistant told me he was unavailable and that I needed to come into the branch right away. My father had actually done it. He had jeopardized my entire livelihood over Audrey's wounded pride. I grabbed my purse and drove straight to the main financial district, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I stormed through the revolving glass doors of the bank and demanded to see the branch manager. He ushered me into a glass-walled office looking incredibly uncomfortable. I demanded to know why my operational accounts were locked and why I could not process my client payroll. The manager slid a thick manila folder across the polished mahogany desk. He explained that a primary account holder had executed an emergency freeze and initiated a major withdrawal late Sunday night. I stared at him in complete disbelief, stating that I was the sole owner of my brokerage. He shook his head and pulled a specific document from the folder. It was a power of attorney form. I snatched the paper from his hands, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. It was an old document from when I was 21 years old. I had signed a temporary medical proxy before studying abroad, but this document had been heavily and fraudulently modified. The scope had been broadened to grant unlimited financial control. The notary stamp at the bottom belonged to a paralegal who worked directly for my father. My parents had weaponized a decade-old signature to legally hijack my business. I checked the recent transaction ledger attached to the back of the file. My jaw dropped. Exactly $30,000 had been wired out of my primary operating fund just hours before the freeze took effect. I walked out of the manager's office, my vision blurring with pure rage. I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring, sounding perfectly cheerful as if she were expecting my call. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I demanded to know where my $30,000 went and how they dared to forge a financial document to steal from my company. Diana did not even attempt to deny it. She let out a soft, condescending sigh that made my blood boil. She coldly admitted that she authorized the transfer to pay off Audrey's mounting credit card debt. According to my mother, Audrey was facing severe penalties and potential bankruptcy because her public relations firm was failing to generate revenue. I reminded Diana that stealing from my corporate account to fund my sister's lavish lifestyle was a federal crime. My mother's voice immediately turned sharp and vicious. You owe this family for raising you, Cassidy. Diana hissed through the receiver. We paid for your braces, your first car, your entire childhood. You have been hoarding your wealth while your sister struggles to keep her head above water. Family requires sacrifice, and since you were too selfish to help Audrey voluntarily, your father and I simply took what was fair. Consider it a late repayment for everything we provided. Do not ever speak to me about federal crimes when you are the one failing your own blood. She hung up the phone before I could respond, leaving me standing in the middle of the bank lobby, completely stripped of my capital and my dignity. I leaned against a marble pillar, fighting off a panic attack. I had a business to run, employees to pay, and clients relying on me. If I missed the noon wire transfer, I would lose a massive commercial deal and permanently damage my professional reputation. The heavy glass doors of the bank swung open. Elijah strode into the lobby. Flanking him were two men in sharp, tailored suits. They were senior litigators. Elijah spotted me immediately. He walked over, pulled me into a reassuring embrace, and promised me that everything was going to be handled. He directed his lawyers to the branch manager's office. Within 20 minutes, the attorneys were tearing into the bank's compliance officer, threatening a massive civil lawsuit for failing to verify the heavily altered, outdated power of attorney document. The legal intimidation worked perfectly. The bank manager desperately agreed to immediately lift the freeze and initiate a fraud investigation to reverse the stolen $30,000. I let out a long breath of relief, leaning my head against Elijah's shoulder. We had survived their first attack. We had protected my business. But the victory was painfully short-lived. Elijah's phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, answering the call with his usual calm demeanor. However, within seconds, the color completely drained from his face. His posture grew rigid, and his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle feathered in his cheek. He ended the call and looked down at me, his eyes dark with an anger I had never seen before. "That was the City Planning Commission," Elijah said, his voice dangerously low. "Your father just used his political connections on the zoning board to file a bogus environmental injunction against my company. They just halted construction on my $15 million historical restoration project. Our entire operation is effectively shut down." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Our entire operation is effectively shut down. Elijah stared at his phone, his usually warm brown eyes hardened into obsidian. My father had not just attacked my real estate brokerage, he had launched a tactical strike against Elijah's livelihood. Harrison had weaponized his cronies on the zoning board, using a fabricated environmental complaint to paralyze a $15 million historical estate restoration. Hundreds of contractors, millions in daily operating costs, and months of meticulous planning were now frozen because of one man's bruised ego. We retreated to our home office, the silence between us thick with shared outrage. Elijah immediately began making damage control calls. He paced the hardwood floor, speaking in low, rapid-fire commands to his project managers and legal team, directing them to file emergency injunctions against the city. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my laptop screen. My mind raced through survival strategies for my brokerage. I needed to secure alternative bridge loans, bypass the frozen accounts, and somehow shield my clients from the fallout of my family's vindictive meltdown. The sheer scale of my parents' malice was staggering. They were actively trying to ruin us. Just as Elijah ended a call with his lead foreman, the doorbell rang. The sharp chime echoed through the tense house. We exchanged a cautious look. Elijah signaled for me to stay put while he went to the front door. A few moments later, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Elijah returned to the home office, and stepping in right behind him was Devin. Devin looked entirely different from the man who had calmly roasted Audrey at the barbecue 2 days prior. Usually the picture of effortless elegance, the sharp, highly successful African-American corporate attorney looked utterly exhausted. His custom-tailored charcoal suit was immaculate, but the knot of his silk tie was loosened, and deep shadows underscored his eyes. In his right hand, he carried a massive, bulging leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain a cinder block. Devin stepped into the room and closed the heavy oak door behind him with a definitive click. He walked straight to my desk and dropped the briefcase onto the polished surface. The dull thud resonated in the quiet room. "I am filing for divorce," Devin said. His voice was completely devoid of emotion, a flat, chilling statement of fact. I gasped, standing up from my chair. Elijah crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe, listening intently. I spent the entire weekend doing a forensic audit on my own marriage. Devin continued unlatching the brass clasps of his briefcase. I knew Audrey was terrible with money. I knew she was obsessed with maintaining this fake influencer lifestyle to impress your parents. But I had no idea how deep the rot actually went until I started digging into my private offshore accounts. Devin pulled out a thick stack of bank statements and financial ledgers, spreading them across my desk. The numbers highlighted in bright yellow marker were staggering. Audrey has been embezzling money from me for 3 years, Devin explained, pointing a steady finger at the paper. Hundreds of thousands of dollars systematically siphoned out of my private holdings. But she was not just buying designer bags or funding that ridiculous public relations firm. She was funneling my money directly to Harrison and Diana. My jaw dropped. To my parents. But they are wealthy. They have the country club memberships, the luxury cars, the massive estate. Devin let out a harsh, humorless laugh. It is all an illusion, Cassidy. A complete, desperate mirage. Your parents are broke. They are drowning in a terrifying amount of debt. Their house is leveraged to the absolute hilt. Those luxury cars are leased under shell companies. They have been living off credit extensions and whatever cash they could bleed out of you and Audrey. When you stopped giving them money, they forced Audrey to steal from me to keep their sinking ship afloat. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with sickening clarity. That was why they had stolen $30,000 from my business account this morning. That was why they reacted with such unhinged hostility when Elijah refused to forgive Audrey's rent. It was not just about pride or protecting their golden child. It was pure, unfiltered financial desperation. The facade was cracking and they were panicking. It gets worse, Devin said, his tone shifting into the sharp, precise cadence of a corporate prosecutor. Audrey's public relations firm is barely functioning as a legitimate business. Your parents have been using her corporate accounts to shuffle their debt around and hide their remaining assets. Harrison and Diana are actively committing massive federal tax fraud. They are running a localized Ponzi scheme just to pay their monthly country club dues, and they have implicated Audrey in every single illegal transaction. I am severing all ties before the federal government kicks their front door off the hinges. I sank back into my chair, the room spinning slightly. My parents were not just toxic, they were criminals. But Devin was not finished. He reached into the very bottom of his briefcase and pulled out a separate, thick legal packet secured with a heavy rubber band. The front page bore the official seal of the county court. I did not just come here to warn you about their bankruptcy, Devin said, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute gravity. This arrived at my law firm an hour ago. Harrison had his personal lawyers fast-track this through a judge he plays golf with. Devin handed the thick packet to me. I stared at the bold, capitalized letters across the top of the summons. They know they cannot bleed me dry anymore, and they know you two are fighting back, Devin stated softly. So they are going for the only real money left in this family. The $20 million trust fund. I looked down at the paper, my blood running ice cold. It was a formal lawsuit filed against my husband. Harrison and Diana are not just freezing your accounts and halting your construction sites, Devin warned, taking a step back. They have officially filed an elder abuse lawsuit against Elijah. They are claiming he is systematically manipulating Grandpa William, isolating him from the family, and actively conspiring to steal the entire estate. They are asking the court for immediate emergency conservatorship over your grandfather. If they win, they take everything. The sheer audacity of the summons sitting on my desk did not break me. It ignited something entirely different. There were no tears, no moments of despair, and no panic. Elijah simply stared at the legal document, his jaw set like granite. He picked up his phone, dialed his lead corporate litigator, and instructed him to draft an immediate counter-lawsuit for power of attorney fraud, attaching Devin's forensic audit as Exhibit A. We were not going to play defense anymore. We were going on the offensive, and we were going to do it tonight. Harrison and Diana were hosting their annual spring charity gala at the Oak Ridge Country Club. It was their most important social event of the year, a glittering spectacle designed to solicit donations from the city elite, while artificially inflating their own societal status. It was the perfect stage for our retaliation. Elijah traded his usual flannel and work boots for a razor-sharp midnight blue bespoke suit that highlighted his imposing frame. I slipped into a tailored emerald green pantsuit, completely shedding the role of the obedient scapegoated daughter. Devin met us in the foyer, adjusting his cuffs. His leather briefcase was packed with the financial ruin of my parents. We walked out the door, a united front ready to dismantle a decades-long illusion. We pulled up to the country club in Elijah's sleek black SUV. The valet tried to ask for our invitations, but Devin simply flashed his bar association credentials, and Elijah's commanding presence parted the staff like water. We strode through the grand mahogany doors and stepped into the main ballroom. The space was dripping with manufactured opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over round tables draped in silk linens. A string quartet played softly in the corner. In the center of the room, holding court at the VIP table, were my parents. Harrison was laughing loudly, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, entertaining a group of city council members and banking executives. Diana stood beside him, draped in diamonds that Devin's audit proved she had not paid for. Audrey sat nearby, nursing a glass of champagne, her face pale and panicked, frantically checking her phone as her own financial reality set in. I did not hesitate. With Elijah on my right and Devin on my left, I marched straight across the ballroom floor. The sharp click of my heels echoed over the classical music. One by one, the elite guests noticed our approach. The murmurs died down. The wealthy socialites turned their heads, sensing the sudden heavy shift in the atmosphere. Harrison spotted us when we were 10 feet away. His fake jovial smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panicked outrage. Diana gasped, clutching her pearls, her eyes darting nervously to the important guests surrounding them. I reached their table and smiled. It was a bright, sweet, completely ruthless smile. "Good evening, Mother and Father," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "I am so sorry to interrupt your lovely fundraiser, but you forgot some highly important paperwork at the bank this morning." I pulled the thick legal folder from my bag and dropped it directly onto Harrison's dinner plate, right on top of his expensive meal. "This is a formal counter lawsuit for financial fraud, forgery, and the unauthorized use of a heavily modified power of attorney document. My legal team filed it exactly 20 minutes ago." The banking executive standing next to Harrison took a collective step back. Harrison's face turned a mottled, furious shade of red. "How dare you come here and cause a scene?" he hissed, keeping his voice low in a desperate attempt to maintain his dignity. "Security will throw you out right now." That is when Devin stepped forward, placing his heavy leather briefcase right in the center of the pristine white tablecloth. He unlatched it with a loud snap that made Diana jump. He pulled out 3 massive stacks of financial ledgers and slammed them down next to my lawsuit. "No one is throwing anyone out, Harrison," Devin said, his deep, authoritative voice echoing so that every millionaire in a 20-foot radius could hear perfectly. "Because I am officially serving you notice of my divorce from your daughter. And while I was liquidating our assets, I completed a full forensic audit of your accounts." Devin turned his sharp gaze to the city council members and the wealthy donors standing nearby. "Do not write any checks to this charity tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Harrison and Diana are completely bankrupt. Their house is leveraged to the maximum limit, their luxury cars are leased through shell companies, and they are currently under active investigation for massive federal tax fraud. They have been using Audrey to embezzle funds from my private accounts just to pay their country club dues. Their entire life is a giant Ponzi scheme." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The surrounding high society guests gasped in unison. A prominent banking executive stared at Harrison in absolute disgust before turning on his heel and marching toward the exit. The city council members hastily stepped away from the table, whispering frantically to their aides, treating my parents like they were highly infectious. The illusion was shattered completely. The wealthy elite of the city were literally running away from them to avoid being associated with federal tax fraud and embezzlement. Diana collapsed into her chair, hiding her face in her hands, her social standing evaporating in real time. Audrey just sat there, frozen in sheer terror. Harrison stood completely alone in the center of the emptying ballroom. His empire of lies was destroyed. His friends had abandoned him. His fake wealth was exposed. He looked at Devin, then at Elijah, and finally at me. He did not yell. He did not scream. Instead, he leaned over the table, his face purple with unhinged, desperate rage. He invaded my personal space, his eyes wide and completely manic. "You think you have won?" Harrison whispered to me, his voice trembling with sheer malice. "You think exposing my bank account saves your precious business? You forgot about the $20 million trust fund. You forgot about the elder abuse lawsuit." I smiled coldly right back at him. "I have not forgotten anything. Grandpa William will gladly testify against you in court tomorrow morning and prove you filed a fraudulent conservatorship." Harrison let out a dark, sinister chuckle that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "No, he will not." Harrison whispered, his lips barely moving. "Because I transferred Grandpa William out of his premium care facility 3 hours ago. I used my medical proxy to pull him out of his bed and put him in a private transport van. You will never find him to testify for you, Cassidy. He is gone." The adrenaline from the country club confrontation instantly evaporated, replaced by a wave of sheer, icy panic. Harrison's malicious whisper echoed in my ears. He had taken Grandpa William. My grandfather was 82 years old and suffered from a severe heart condition. He required a highly specific regimen of daily medication, closely monitored by specialized cardiac nurses, just to keep his heart from failing. Harrison pulling him out of a premium care facility was not just a legal maneuver to secure a $20 million trust fund. It was essentially signing a death warrant. Elijah did not shout or react with physical violence, though I saw the muscles in his forearms bunch tightly against the fabric of his tailored suit. He simply grabbed my hand, gave Harrison a look of absolute lethal promise, and guided me away from the stunned crowd. Devin followed right behind us, his phone already out and dialing. We burst through the heavy mahogany doors of the country club and sprinted to Elijah's SUV. As soon as the doors slammed shut, the suffocating reality of the situation crashed down on me. I struggled to catch my breath, my hands shaking violently as I visualized my grandfather confused, terrified, and without his vital medication. We could not just call the local police. Harrison had deep political connections and a team of expensive lawyers. He would simply flash his fraudulently obtained medical proxy claim he was moving his father to a better facility and tie the authorities up in bureaucratic red tape for days. We did not have days. We barely had hours. Elijah shifted the SUV into gear, his mind instantly pivoting into tactical crisis mode. He bypassed the traditional authorities entirely. As the founder and CEO of a premier historical estate restoration firm, Elijah commanded a massive, intensely loyal workforce. He did not just manage executives in glass boardrooms, he employed hundreds of contractors, heavy machinery operators, logistics coordinators, and delivery drivers who blanketed the entire metropolitan area and the surrounding counties. Elijah put his phone on speaker and initiated a company-wide emergency broadcast. He contacted his regional directors and foremen, offering a massive personal cash reward for anyone who could locate a specific private medical transport van. Devin used his legal credentials to quickly extract the exact license plate number and transport company name from the premium care facility's panicked night manager. Within 20 minutes, a private army of blue-collar workers, the very people my family constantly looked down upon, was actively scouring highways, back roads, and medical centers across the state, hunting for my grandfather. While Elijah coordinated the grid search from the driver's seat, my own phone began to vibrate violently in my purse. It was not a call from my parents. It was a relentless stream of notifications, emails, and urgent text messages from my real estate clients. I unlocked my screen, and a fresh wave of nausea hit me. Audrey had wasted no time launching a catastrophic counterattack. Realizing her financial ruin was imminent, she had grabbed her phone, locked herself in a bathroom at the country club, and recorded a highly edited, dramatically filtered video for her massive social media following. The video was already trending locally, spreading like wildfire across community groups and business networks. Audrey stared into the camera, her mascara perfectly smudged to simulate crying, her voice trembling with manufactured trauma. She wove a horrific, entirely fabricated narrative. She claimed that her jealous, estranged sister and a violent thug husband had just violently crashed a peaceful charity gala. She sobbed directly to her followers, claiming we had physically threatened our elderly parents and were actively trying to extort the family out of their life savings. She used every manipulative buzzword designed to trigger the internet algorithm, painting herself as the terrified victim of unhinged family violence. The fallout was immediate and devastating. The court of public opinion moves faster than any legal proceeding. My professional reputation was burning down in real time. My inbox was flooding with cancellation notices. High-net-worth clients who had trusted me with multi-million-dollar commercial properties were backing out of their exclusive contracts. Escrow agents were pausing transactions. My brokerage, the business I had bled to build from the ground up without a single cent of family money, was hemorrhaging clients by the minute. Devin leaned forward from the back seat, looking at the viral video playing on my screen. He let out a harsh breath, his eyes narrowed with disgust. "She is creating a public diversion," Devin stated analytically. "Audrey is trying to destroy your credibility so that when you report the trust fund theft and the kidnapping, no one will believe you. She is trying to brand you as a disgruntled, crazy relative." I locked my phone and tossed it into the center console. I did not care about the lost contracts. I did not care about Audrey's pathetic smear campaign or the angry comments flooding my business pages. Let the brokerage burn. None of it mattered if Grandpa William did not survive the night. The hours dragged on in agonizing suspense. We drove aimlessly along the interstate, waiting for a break, the tension in the SUV suffocating. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed bright red, mocking us as it crossed past midnight. Grandpa William had already missed his evening dosage. Time was running out. Suddenly, the Bluetooth interface on the dashboard blared to life. It was a call from Elijah's lead logistics foreman, a gritty veteran who oversaw the regional supply routes. Elijah answered immediately. The foreman's voice crackled through the speakers, breathless but sharp. He had spotted the transport van. It had not gone to another premium hospital or a specialized cardiac care center. It had crossed state lines into a heavily wooded rural county far outside the city's jurisdiction. The foreman described the location, and my blood ran cold. The van was parked behind a shady, unlicensed, off-the-grid nursing facility. It was a bleak, decaying concrete building surrounded by rusted chain-link fencing and failing infrastructure, a notorious dumping ground for the forgotten hidden deep in the woods where no state inspectors ever visited. Elijah did not hesitate. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, and locked eyes with me. We had the location. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, the powerful engine roaring to life, and we sped desperately into the pitch-black night. The tires of Elijah's SUV crunched violently against the broken gravel of the parking lot as we finally arrived. The dashboard clock glared a menacing 2 in the morning. The facility looming before us was a concrete nightmare. It looked nothing like a medical care center. It was a decaying rectangular block surrounded by dying weeds and a rusted chain-link fence that had seen better decades. A single flickering security light illuminated the cracked pavement. There, parked carelessly near the rear loading dock, was the private medical transport van our foreman had identified. My grandfather was inside this desolate prison. Devin unbuckled his seatbelt, his expression tight with legal calculation. He warned us to be careful, noting that we were in a rural county where Harrison likely had local law enforcement in his pocket. I did not care about the risks. My 82-year-old grandfather had a failing heart, and he was currently missing his vital life-saving medication. I shoved my door open and sprinted toward the main entrance, the freezing night air biting at my lungs. Elijah matched my pace, his presence a solid wall of protection right beside me. I pounded my fists against the heavy reinforced glass of the front doors. After several agonizing minutes, a man shambled out of a back office. He was a hollow-eyed, greasy-looking manager, wearing a stained scrub top. He unlocked the deadbolt, but kept the thick security chain firmly attached, peering out at us with a mixture of annoyance and suspicion. I demanded to see William, immediately stating I was his granddaughter and that he was experiencing a severe medical emergency. The crooked manager let out a dry, hacking laugh. He looked at us with absolute contempt. He stated he had no idea who we were and flatly refused to let us inside. He cited strict HIPAA privacy laws and informed us that the primary proxy, a man named Harrison, had issued a mandatory no visitors directive. The manager sneered, adding that Harrison had explicitly warned him about a disgruntled, estranged daughter trying to cause trouble. He threatened to call the police if we did not leave the property immediately. Devin stepped forward, positioning himself directly in the manager's line of sight. Using his commanding, authoritative attorney voice, Devin cited federal elder endangerment statutes and demanded emergency access to verify the patient's medical stability. The manager simply rolled his eyes, utterly unfazed by the legal jargon. He smugly replied that he answered only to the person paying the bills. He slammed the heavy steel door shut, and the unmistakable click of a deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the quiet night. A wave of suffocating panic washed over me. Every passing second pushed Grandpa William closer to a fatal cardiac event. I turned to Elijah, my eyes pleading. Elijah stared at the locked, reinforced door, his jaw clenched tight. He looked at Devin. "Legal options are exhausted," Elijah stated, his voice calm, but layered with a dangerous edge. Elijah turned on his heel and walked briskly back to the SUV. He popped the rear trunk and reached into his heavy-duty tool storage. He pulled out a massive, solid steel crowbar. The metal gleamed coldly under the parking lot lights. Devin immediately stepped up, raising a hand in caution. He reminded Elijah that forcefully breaching a medical facility was a massive felony, a breaking and entering charge that Harrison could easily use to destroy Elijah's corporate development licenses. Elijah gripped the crowbar tightly, his knuckles turning white. "He is family," Elijah replied, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for debate. Elijah bypassed the reinforced front entrance and marched around the perimeter of the building until he found a rusted, poorly maintained utility door near the loading dock. He wedged the flat edge of the solid steel crowbar right into the doorframe. With a massive surge of pure physical strength, he threw his entire weight against the metal. The rusted hinges groaned in protest. Elijah struck again, using his expert knowledge of structural leverage. Wood splintered, metal shrieked, and the heavy security door violently burst open. We rushed into the facility. The air inside was suffocating, thick with the overwhelming stench of industrial bleach, stale urine, and sheer neglect. Flickering fluorescent tubes cast a sickly yellowish pallor over the peeling linoleum floors. The conditions were absolutely horrific. As we hurried down the dimly lit corridors, I glanced into the open doorways. Elderly patients in paper-thin gowns stared blankly at the walls, their eyes hollow and heavily medicated. There were no nurses in sight, no emergency call buttons, no proper medical equipment. It was not a healthcare center. It was a dark, off-the-grid holding cell designed for the forgotten. We reached a deserted, disorganized nurses' station at the end of the main hallway. Devin quickly bypassed the outdated computer system and grabbed a physical clipboard resting on the desk. He scanned the sloppy, handwritten patient registry. He found Harrison's last name listed next to room 114. We sprinted down the final shadowed corridor. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. We reached the heavy wooden door of room 114. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, stepping into the dark, stifling room, illuminated only by a single broken street lamp outside the barred window. I rushed toward the hospital bed, desperately hoping to see my grandfather resting safely. The bed was empty. The mattress was perfectly flat, the cheap, scratchy blanket pulled tightly across the surface. It had never been slept in. My breath caught in my throat. I frantically flipped on the harsh overhead light. The room was completely barren. There were no heart monitors, no IV stands, no luggage, and no sign of William. But resting dead center on the sterile flat pillow was a single piece of torn yellow-lined paper. I approached the bed slowly, my hands trembling violently. I immediately recognized the elegant, shaky cursive handwriting. It was Grandpa William's script. The note contained 5 chilling words. "Run, Cassidy. It is a trap." Before my brain could even process the terrifying warning, the dark room was violently illuminated. Blinding flashes of red and blue light sliced fiercely through the dirty window panes, washing the pale walls in a frantic, strobing rhythm. The deafening wail of police sirens shattered the dead silence of the rural night, echoing aggressively off the concrete building. Elijah rushed to the window and looked down at the gravel parking lot. 4 county sheriff cruisers had just skidded to a halt, completely barricading the exit and boxing in his SUV. Heavy boots were already pounding against the pavement outside. Harrison did not just hide Grandpa William to secure the trust fund. He had deliberately lured us across state lines to a facility he secretly controlled, staging a felony break-in to legally eliminate the only people standing in his way. Heavy boots pounded fiercely down the cracked linoleum hallway. The blinding beam of high-powered tactical flashlights cut abruptly through the suffocating darkness of room 114. 2 county sheriff deputies burst violently through the doorway, with their service weapons drawn, shouting conflicting aggressive orders. A burly man with captain insignia glinting on his dark collar stepped into the room right behind them, a smug, deeply satisfied smirk plastered across his face. He did not look like a standard officer responding to a basic break-in. He looked exactly like a hired mercenary collecting a very specific bounty. "Put your hands directly on your heads and step away from the window immediately," the captain barked, resting his heavy hand casually on his holster. "You two are trespassing on private medical property." Elijah did not flinch. He immediately stepped right in front of me, shielding my entire body with his own imposing broad-shouldered frame. He raised his hands slowly and deliberately into the air, his voice radiating a calm, terrifying authority that demanded absolute attention. "We are here checking on the welfare of an elderly family member who was forcefully relocated against medical advice." Elijah stated, his tone unwavering. "You can lower your weapons right now. There is absolutely no threat here." The captain merely scoffed, stepping dangerously closer. "The only threat I see is a dangerous thug destroying private property. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You are both under arrest for felony breaking and entering, severe vandalism, and elder endangerment." I felt a cold sweat break out across the back of my neck. Harrison had orchestrated this entire nightmare scenario flawlessly. He had paid off the local county sheriff department to wait silently in the shadows while we breached the building out of pure desperation. With one single phone call, my father had ensured Elijah would lose his multi-million-dollar commercial development licenses due to a felony conviction. Meanwhile, I would be thrown into a dirty holding cell, entirely neutralizing us, while Audrey seized total control of the $20 million family trust fund. It was a brilliant, devastating checkmate. A deputy grabbed my arm roughly, forcing my wrists together. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit painfully into my bare skin. Elijah clenched his jaw, his eyes blazing with suppressed lethal fury, as another deputy forcefully shoved him against the peeling wallpaper to secure his rigid wrists. We were marched brutally out of the dark, suffocating room and paraded down the grim hallway like hardened criminals. The crooked facility manager stood near the shattered entrance, grinning maliciously as we were shoved out into the freezing, unforgiving night air. We were completely trapped. The 4 sheriff cruisers formed an impenetrable, flashing barricade around Elijah's vehicle. The blinding red and blue lights illuminated the dusty gravel lot, casting long, frantic shadows against the rusted chain-link fence. The captain grabbed my shoulder, steering me aggressively toward the caged back seat of his waiting cruiser. Just as his thick fingers reached for the metal door handle, the deafening screech of heavy tires tearing across asphalt shattered the rural quiet. A massive, pitch-black SUV sped off the main highway, tearing through the open front gates of the facility at a terrifying speed. The heavy vehicle did not slow down. It aggressively swerved right into the dead center of the police barricade, its blinding high-beam headlights washing over the shocked, temporarily blinded deputies. The SUV slammed to a violent halt, the thick tires kicking up a massive cloud of dust and sharp gravel that pelted the police cruisers. The doors unlocked with a sharp electronic chirp. Devin stepped out into the chaotic scene. My brother-in-law looked absolutely formidable. As a highly successful African-American corporate and tax attorney, Devin knew exactly how to command a hostile room, and a gravel parking lot full of corrupt local cops was absolutely no exception. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored, dark overcoat, entirely unfazed by the flashing sirens and drawn service weapons. In his right hand, he carried his signature heavy leather briefcase. He walked straight toward the sheriff captain with the calculated, unstoppable momentum of a federal prosecutor smelling fresh blood in the water. "Stand down," Devin ordered. His deep, resonant voice cut cleanly through the blaring noise of the sirens, carrying an absolute, undeniable legal authority. "Release my clients immediately." The captain narrowed his eyes, squaring his bulky shoulders in a transparent attempt to assert dominance. "And who exactly are you supposed to be? Step behind the yellow tape right now before I arrest you for interfering with an active crime scene." Devin did not stop walking until he was mere inches away from the corrupt captain. He reached smoothly into his tailored coat pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gleaming federal credential badge. "I am the lead legal counsel for these two individuals." Devin stated, his words clipped and surgically precise. "And more importantly, I am acting as an authorized officer of the federal court. You are currently engaging in the unlawful detention of my clients who entered this premises under emergency legal protection." Devin unlatched his briefcase right on the hood of the police cruiser. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bearing the unmistakable heavy red seal of a federal judge. He slapped the paperwork directly onto the captain's chest. "That is a federal injunction," Devin snapped, his voice ringing with lethal legal precision. "And beneath it is a writ of habeas corpus signed by a federal magistrate exactly 45 minutes ago. It mandates the immediate physical production of William, the elderly patient illegally trafficked to this off-the-grid facility by a man named Harrison. Your local precinct does not have jurisdiction over a federal kidnapping and interstate extortion investigation." The color completely drained from the captain's face. He looked down at the official federal seals, his arrogant bravado dissolving into raw panic. Harrison had paid him to arrest a couple of trespassing relatives, not to obstruct a massive federal investigation involving high-powered corporate attorneys. The captain quickly signaled to his deputies. They hastily unlocked our handcuffs, stepping back nervously. Devin did not even acknowledge their retreat. He turned his terrifying gaze directly onto the crooked facility manager, who was shrinking back against the shattered doorframe. Devin marched up the concrete steps looming over the greasy manager. "The federal injunction compels you to produce William right this second," Devin growled, grabbing the manager by the collar of his stained scrub top. "If you tell me he was transferred, or if you attempt to conceal his location, I will personally see to it that you are indicted for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, wire fraud, and federal kidnapping. You will spend the next 30 years in a maximum security penitentiary. Where is he?" The manager began to violently tremble. The threat of federal prison shattered whatever loyalty Harrison had bought. The manager raised his hands defensively, his voice cracking with pure terror. "I did not transfer him," the manager stammered, sweating profusely. "Harrison sent 2 enforcers to move the old man to another state line 3 hours ago." But the old man fought back. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and smashed the hallway alarms. When the enforcers got distracted, he ran. I grabbed the manager's arm. "Where did he go?" The manager swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the dark, flooded basement stairs. "He is not missing," the manager confessed, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. He locked himself inside the facility's reinforced basement electrical room to hide from Harrison's goons. The door is solid steel. We could not break it down, and the old man absolutely refuses to come out. I shoved past the crooked manager, my heart hammering against my ribs, and sprinted toward the flooded basement stairs. Elijah and Devin were right on my heels, their heavy footsteps echoing down the grim stairwell. The freezing air smelled of stagnant water. We waded through ankle-deep puddles using phone flashlights to cut through the darkness. At the end of the corridor, we found a steel door marked with an electrical hazard sign. I slammed my hands against the metal surface. "Grandpa!" I yelled, my voice cracking with desperate panic. "It is Cassidy. We are here. Please open the door." Silence hung heavily. For a terrifying moment I feared we were too late. Then a muffled shuffling sounded from the other side of the heavy barrier. A raspy, exhausted voice called out, demanding proof. "Cassidy, what did I give you on your 10th birthday?" Tears pricked my eyes. It was our secret password, a memory my parents always mocked. "A vintage drafting compass," I answered, pressing my forehead against the cold door. "Because you told me I was meant to design my own life, not inherit someone else's blueprint." A heavy thud echoed from inside. The deadbolt scraped back. The steel door groaned open. Grandpa William stood illuminated by our flashlights. He looked incredibly fragile. His skin was pale and he clutched his chest tightly, suffering from missing his cardiac medication. Yet despite the physical toll, a fierce smile stretched across his weathered face. He looked at Elijah, Devin, and me. He stood tall, refusing to let Harrison's cruelty break him. "I told them you would come," Grandpa William rasped, pulling me into a fierce embrace. Elijah scooped my grandfather up effortlessly, carrying him up the flooded stairs. Devin covered our exit, ensuring the disgraced manager and the corrupt deputies stayed exactly where they were. We loaded Grandpa William into the SUV, wrapping him in heavy thermal blankets. Elijah tore out of the gravel parking lot, leaving the flashing police lights far behind us. We did not risk taking him to any local clinic. Elijah drove straight to a highly secure private hospital in the city, a medical center his development firm had recently renovated. The hospital staff recognized Elijah instantly and rushed a cardiac trauma team to the emergency bay. Within minutes, Grandpa William was safely settled in a heavily guarded VIP suite, receiving the intravenous medications he desperately needed to stabilize his failing heart. Once the physician assured us that William was out of immediate danger, we gathered around his bed. I sat beside him, holding his frail hand, overwhelmed with relief. "I thought we had lost you," I whispered. "Dad told us he moved you to a better facility." Grandpa William coughed. "Harrison only cares about facilities that accept cash bribes. But I was not just hiding in that basement to save my skin, Cassidy. I locked myself in that electrical room because I needed to protect something far more valuable than my life." He reached into his hospital gown pocket. His trembling fingers produced a sleek digital voice recorder. He handed the device directly to Elijah, his eyes narrowing with uncompromising resolve. "Harrison and Diana thought they could break an old man by taking away his pills," Grandpa William stated, his voice gaining strength. "They did not realize I have been recording their visits for the past 3 weeks. Play it." Elijah pressed the play button. The digital audio was crystal clear, capturing the sinister tones of my parents inside William's former room. Harrison's voice echoed from the small speaker. "You are going to sign the trust fund transfer documents right now, Dad. Audrey needs the capital to save her public relations firm, and Cassidy has proven she is a selfish, ungrateful child." Then my mother's voice sliced through the audio, venomous and completely devoid of human empathy. "Do not be stubborn, William. The nurses are not coming. We told them you were sleeping. If you do not sign the $20 million estate over to Audrey this exact second, Harrison is going to take your heart medication and flush it down the toilet. You will not survive the night without it. Sign the paper or we leave you here to die." A suffocated silence fell over the hospital room as the recording clicked off. The unadulterated evil of their extortion was nauseating. They had literally held my grandfather's life hostage to steal his fortune. Devin stared at the recorder, his sharp legal mind instantly processing the gravity of the evidence. That is premeditated attempted murder, elder abuse, and felony extortion. Devin declared, his voice cold as ice. This audio recording will send Harrison and Diana to federal prison for the rest of their natural lives. We have everything we need to destroy them permanently. Before anyone could celebrate, the harsh chime of an emergency legal alert erupted from Devin's jacket pocket. Devin pulled out his phone, his eyes scanning the urgent email notification from his corporate law firm. The color rapidly drained from his face. His jaw tightened, and he looked up at us, his expression grim. Audrey did not stop when she realized you bypassed the corrupt police. Devin warned, his voice urgent. She found a corrupt local judge in your parents' home county, a judge who heavily relies on Harrison's political campaign donations. Audrey filed an emergency ex parte petition claiming William is severely mentally unfit and currently missing due to a violent kidnapping orchestrated by Cassidy. Devin turned the phone screen toward us, displaying the official court docket. The judge granted the petition 5 minutes ago. Devin stated, his words hitting us like a freight train. Audrey has just been granted temporary emergency conservatorship over William. She legally overrode your medical proxy, Cassidy. If Audrey signs the final execution papers at the courthouse at 9 o'clock this morning, she gains absolute legal control over the entire $20 million estate, and she will have the legal authority to unplug his life support. The sheer horror of Devin's words paralyzed me for a fraction of a second. Audrey was not just after the money anymore. She was positioning herself to execute a legalized murder to silence the only witness to her parents' extortion. I looked at the digital clock on the hospital wall. It glared back at us in bright red numbers. 8 o'clock in the morning. We had exactly 59 minutes before the corrupt local judge handed my sister the metaphorical executioner's switch. Elijah did not waste time with panic. He immediately coordinated with the hospital's private security chief, a former military contractor, who owed him a massive favor. Elijah placed a heavily armed elite security detail directly outside Grandpa William's door. No one gets in without my explicit verbal authorization, Elijah commanded, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation or error. Devin grabbed the digital voice recorder, securing it inside his custom leather briefcase, while simultaneously uploading a highly encrypted copy of the audio file to his secure federal server. We sprinted out of the VIP suite and took the service elevator down to the underground parking garage. We piled into Elijah's heavy-duty customized work truck. It was a massive matte black beast equipped with a reinforced solid steel push bumper, specifically designed for moving heavy debris on industrial construction sites. Elijah slammed the powerful diesel engine into gear, and we tore out of the parking garage, merging violently into the chaotic gridlock of morning rush-hour traffic. The GPS indicated the county courthouse was 45 minutes away under normal conditions. Today, conditions were anything but normal. Devin sat in the passenger seat, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard as he frantically drafted an emergency federal injunction to counter the corrupt local judge. I sat in the back, gripping the leather seat as Elijah expertly wove the massive truck through the dense sea of morning commuters. He treated the congested highway like a high-speed tactical course, utilizing the shoulder and exit lanes to bypass miles of absolute gridlock. The heavy engine roared as we pushed the speed limit to its absolute breaking point. We were making incredible time. The dashboard clock read 8:30. We were halfway there. Then my blood ran cold. I glanced out the rear window and noticed 2 unmarked, heavily tinted black SUVs swerving aggressively through traffic, mirroring our exact lane changes. They were not angry commuters. They were moving with predatory precision, ignoring all traffic laws to close the distance between us. Elijah. I warned, my voice tight with rising panic. We have company behind us. Elijah glanced in the rearview mirror, his jaw hardened into stone. Harrison must have put trackers on all our vehicles when he realized we escaped the nursing home. Elijah stated, his voice dangerously calm. He knows we have the recording. He hired private muscle to make sure we never reach that courthouse today. The first black SUV accelerated with terrifying speed, pulling up parallel to our passenger side. The tinted window rolled down, revealing a masked man holding a heavy, blunt object. He swerved his vehicle violently toward us, attempting to run Elijah's truck off the elevated highway and force us into the solid concrete median. I braced for the impact, a scream catching in my throat as the gap between our vehicles vanished. Elijah did not flinch. He did not yield a single inch of the lane. Instead of swerving away, Elijah leaned completely into the aggression. He gripped the steering wheel and executed a precise, hard jerk toward the attacking vehicle. Our reinforced steel bumper slammed brutally into the side panel of their SUV. The deafening crunch of crushing metal echoed over the busy highway. The attacking vehicle sparked wildly against the concrete divider, losing its momentum entirely and dropping back into the chaotic traffic. But Harrison's hired thugs were relentless. The second SUV aggressively boxed us in from the front, slamming on its brakes in the middle of the fast lane to force a catastrophic collision. The trap was perfectly executed. We were trapped behind a solid wall of traffic, with the hostile vehicle directly in our path, trying to force us to a complete dead stop on an active interstate. "Hold on tightly," Elijah roared, his voice cutting sharply through the panic in the cabin. "I am not letting them stop us." Elijah downshifted the massive engine, calculating the exact trajectory for impact. He did not slam on the brakes. He accelerated. The roaring diesel engine of the heavy-duty work truck overpowered the highway noise. Elijah angled the truck perfectly, utilizing the reinforced solid steel push bumper like a devastating battering ram. We hit the rear corner of the blocking SUV with a terrifying explosive impact. The sheer kinetic force of our heavy truck lifted the rear axle of the enemy vehicle completely off the pavement. The SUV spun wildly out of control, fishtailing across 3 lanes of traffic before crashing violently into a guardrail, rendering it completely undrivable. Elijah powered right through the opening, the raw horsepower of his truck leaving the smoking wreckage far behind. We tore off the highway exit, rocketing toward the downtown judicial district. My heart hammered against my ribs, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Elijah had literally bulldozed through Harrison's hired muscle to prioritize my safety and protect the crucial evidence. We skidded to a chaotic halt in the red loading zone directly in front of the imposing county courthouse. The dashboard clock flashed 8:55. We had exactly 4 minutes left. We abandoned the battered truck and sprinted up the wide marble steps. Devin led the charge, his federal attorney badge already out and flashing brightly at the security checkpoint. The guards took one look at his high-level credentials and waved us through the metal detectors without a second thought. We sprinted down the echoing, polished corridors of the 3rd floor. I could hear my own ragged breathing as we frantically searched for courtroom 4. The heavy oak doors loomed ahead at the end of the hallway. It was 8:59. Inside that room, Audrey was seconds away from signing away my grandfather's life and his entire $20 million fortune. We burst through the double doors with explosive force. The heavy wood slammed against the wall with a thunderous crash that silenced the entire courtroom instantly. At the front bench, Audrey stood triumphantly next to a corrupt, sweating local judge. She held an expensive fountain pen suspended directly over the finalized conservatorship documents. Harrison and Diana sat in the front row, their faces twisted into smug, victorious smiles as they anticipated their massive payout. The corrupt judge scowled at our interruption, raising his wooden gavel high into the air to finalize the transfer of absolute power to my sister. "Objection," Devin shouted. His booming, authoritative voice rattled the courtroom windows. He marched straight down the center aisle, completely ignoring the protest of the bailiffs. He slammed the digital voice recorder onto the polished defense table and pressed play. The horrific audio of Harrison and Diana threatening to withhold my grandfather's heart medication blasted at maximum volume for the entire courtroom to hear. The undeniable sound of my parents extorting an elderly, vulnerable man for his fortune echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings, freezing every single person in the room. Audrey dropped the fountain pen in pure shock, watching the ink bleed into the documents that would now serve as evidence of her fraudulent conspiracy. The heavy silence in the courtroom was absolute. the horrifying recording of my parents explicitly threatening to withhold Grandpa William's life-saving heart medication hung in the stale air. The corrupt local judge, who just moments ago had been practically salivating at the chance to grant Audrey control of a $20 million estate, now looked as though he had seen a ghost. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of ash gray. He slowly lowered his wooden gavel, placing it on the bench as if it had suddenly caught fire. He knew instantly that Devin had just checkmated him. If he signed those conservatorship papers now, he would be legally documented as a co-conspirator in a massive federal extortion plot. Audrey stared at the bleeding ink on the documents before her, her hands trembling violently. The reality of her failed scheme crashed down on her all at once. She snapped. Audrey slammed her hands onto the polished defense table, her perfectly manicured facade disintegrating into pure, unhinged hysteria. "That is a fake!" Audrey shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the high vaulted ceilings. She pointed a frantic, shaking finger at Devin. "He fabricated that audio. It is artificial intelligence. It is a complete setup. My sister is a manipulative liar, and you cannot believe a single word of that recording." The judge did not even look at her. He aggressively banged his gavel, demanding absolute silence in his courtroom. He was no longer interested in protecting Harrison's political donations. He was solely focused on saving his own career and avoiding federal prison. "This court finds the emergency petition for conservatorship entirely without merit," the judge declared, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic. "The petition is immediately revoked and dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the highly disturbing evidence just presented to this court, I am granting emergency temporary protective custody of William to his granddaughter Cassidy, effective immediately." Audrey unleashed a blood-curdling scream. She grabbed the thick stack of fraudulent legal documents and violently hurled them across the courtroom. Papers fluttered through the air like snow. She lunged toward the bench, demanding the judge reconsider, but two heavily armed bailiffs instantly intercepted her. They grabbed her arms, forcefully restraining her and dragging her back behind the defense table. Harrison and Diana, who had been sitting smugly in the front row just seconds before, now looked like cornered animals. My father's jaw dropped in sheer disbelief, and my mother instinctively shrank back into her seat, realizing the gravity of the federal agents and legal threats Devin had brought into the room. We did not stay to watch the rest of Audrey's humiliating meltdown. Elijah placed a protective hand on the small of my back, and together with Devin we turned and walked out of the chaotic courtroom. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind us, cutting off the sound of my sister's frantic, desperate screaming. We marched down the polished marble hallway, the adrenaline still pumping fiercely through my veins. We had won. We had saved Grandpa William and protected his entire legacy. But as I looked at Devin, a profound realization hit me. He had operated with a level of tactical precision that went far beyond a standard divorce proceeding. "Devin," I said, stopping in the middle of the empty corridor, "how did you know exactly what to do? You had federal injunctions drawn up in the middle of the night. You pulled a writ of habeas corpus out of thin air. You walked into a rural county standoff and commanded local police like they worked for you. What is really going on here?" Devin checked the hallway, his sharp eyes scanning for any lingering court staff or Harrison's hired thugs. Seeing the corridor was completely secure, he gestured toward a small soundproofed attorney-client consultation room. He ushered Elijah and me inside and locked the heavy door behind us with a definitive click. Devin set his custom leather briefcase down on the small table. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket and let out a long, heavy breath, shedding the polished corporate lawyer persona he had worn like armor all morning. "I am filing for divorce, Cassidy," Devin stated, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. "And everything I told you about Audrey embezzling from my private offshore accounts to fund your parents' sinking lifestyle is absolutely true. But that is only a fraction of the story. I am not just an angry husband looking to liquidate assets and protect his wealth." Devin leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table, holding my gaze with absolute intensity. As a corporate tax attorney, I see financial anomalies that most people overlook. When I first noticed the missing funds 6 months ago, I started quietly pulling the thread. I dug into Harrison and Diana's dummy corporations, their shell companies, and the fake charities they run through the country club. I discovered a massive, highly sophisticated multi-state Ponzi scheme. They have been laundering millions of dollars, evading federal taxes, and hiding illicit assets offshore. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of his revelation. 6 months, I whispered. You have known about this for 6 months. Yes, Devin confirmed firmly. And I did not just file for divorce. The very day I uncovered the true scale of their financial crimes, I drove straight to the federal building downtown. For the past 6 months, I have been acting as a highly classified confidential informant for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Elijah crossed his arms, his eyes widening slightly as the pieces finally clicked together. You have been feeding the federal government their financial ledgers this entire time, Elijah said, a tone of deep respect entering his voice. You built the entire federal case from the inside out. Exactly, Devin nodded. Every fake invoice, every fraudulent wire transfer, every offshore deposit. The IRS has been building an airtight, impenetrable federal indictment. They have been waiting patiently for the perfect moment to drop the hammer, and that moment has finally arrived. Devin unlocked his phone and showed us a heavily encrypted message thread. The IRS is fully mobilized. Devin warned, his voice tight with anticipation. They have tactical strike teams positioned and ready to raid Harrison, Diana, and Audrey's properties, seize their assets, and freeze every single bank account they have access to tomorrow at dawn. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. It was over. They were finally going to federal prison. But there is one massive problem, Devin continued, his expression darkening. Your parents are incredibly slippery. They have layered their offshore accounts behind highly complex legal loopholes. The IRS can nail them for tax evasion, which carries a few years in minimum security prison. But to make the federal wire fraud charges stick permanently, to guarantee a maximum sentence without any possibility of parole or plea deals, the federal agents need undeniable proof of active, ongoing malicious intent. Devin looked directly at me and Elijah. The IRS needs your family to attempt one final massive illegal electronic transfer across state lines right directly into the federal trap we have set up. We need them to willingly hit the transfer button on a stolen fortune. How do we make them do that? I asked, my pulse quickening at the sheer risk involved. Devin smiled, but it was a cold, calculating expression. They are desperate, furious, and currently cornered like rats. We need to offer them an irresistible target. We need a bait so massive and so tempting that their greed entirely overrides their caution. We need to hand them the keys to a fortune and let them steal it while the federal government watches. I stared at Devin, the sheer audacity of his proposal taking root in my mind. We needed a bait. A trap so perfectly disguised as a surrender that my parents and Audrey would walk right into it without a single second of hesitation. My mind raced rapidly, piecing together the psychological profile of the family that had actively tormented me for over 3 decades. They did not just want financial dominance, they demanded total, humiliating submission. They wanted me to beg for their mercy in the most public, degrading way possible. I looked up at Elijah and Devin, and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I told them I knew exactly how to deliver that fortune and guarantee their absolute downfall. We were not going to execute this transaction in a sterile boardroom or a quiet lawyer's office. If my parents wanted to play the role of high society elites crushing their disobedient, scapegoated daughter, we would give them the ultimate stage. We would feed their massive, fragile egos right before we shattered them completely. I turned to Elijah and asked if he still maintained a direct line to the owner of Laura, the most exclusive private Michelin star restaurant in the entire city. It was an establishment so elite and pretentious that dinner reservations required a rigorous background check and a minimum 6-month waiting list. Elijah smiled, a dangerous, knowing glint shining in his dark eyes. He told me he did not just have the contact information. His elite development firm had personally overseen the multi-million-dollar historical restoration of their main dining room the previous year. The restaurant owner owed him a massive, undeniable favor. Within 10 minutes, Elijah made a single phone call. He rented out the entire Michelin star establishment for the following evening, ensuring complete privacy, zero civilian witnesses, and our absolute control over the environment. Now came the delicate execution of the bait. I needed to craft a message that perfectly captured the essence of a broken, utterly defeated woman. I drove to a boutique luxury stationer downtown and ordered custom heavy cardstock invitations featuring elaborate gold embossing and a formal wax seal. The physical aesthetic had to strongly appeal to Diana's unhinged obsession with luxury and status. The text itself was carefully engineered to stroke their raging narcissism. I wrote that I was completely exhausted by the relentless legal fighting and the emotional toll of our fractured family. I admitted that Audrey's viral social media smear campaign was actively destroying my real estate brokerage and rapidly ruining my professional reputation in the city. I stated that the pressure was simply too much for me to bear, and I was finally ready to wave the white flag. The invitation formally requested the immediate presence of Harrison, Diana, and Audrey for a private reconciliation dinner. I explicitly promised that if they agreed to call off the public attacks, retract the viral videos, and drop the fabricated environmental injunctions against Elijah's construction sites, I would bring the binding legal paperwork to the dinner. I offered to sign over my entire commercial brokerage and immediately transfer Grandpa William's $20 million trust fund directly into Audrey's offshore control to buy my permanent peace. We hired a uniformed white glove courier service to hand-deliver the embossed envelopes directly to their heavily mortgaged estate and Audrey's luxury penthouse. The physical presentation was a crucial psychological tactic. It communicated ultimate submission. It screamed that they had won the war. Returning to our house, the atmosphere shifted immediately from planning to tactical execution. Devon's federal connections moved with terrifying, silent efficiency. By early evening, our spacious living room had been transformed into a localized command center. 4 plainclothes agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division sat around our coffee table. They were quiet, intense professionals, rapidly analyzing the architectural floor plans of the Michelin star restaurant and syncing their encrypted laptops with Devon's secure corporate servers. The lead federal operative, a sharp-eyed woman named Agent Reyes, walked me through the exact parameters of the sting operation. She explained the strict legal boundaries we had to navigate. For the federal wire fraud charges to stick, permanently carrying the maximum sentencing guidelines without any chance of parole, the perpetrators needed to willingly initiate the electronic transfer themselves. There could be absolutely no coercion, no threats, and no physical force on our part. Harrison, Diana, and Audrey had to act out of pure, unadulterated malice and voluntary greed. They had to press the confirmation button with their own hands. The silence in the living room grew thick with heavy anticipation. Elijah sat beside me on the sofa, his solid, comforting presence anchoring my racing heartbeat. Devon stood by the large bay window, reviewing the digital network tracing protocols with Agent Reyes. The trap was flawlessly set, but everything hinged entirely on whether my family's staggering arrogance would blind them to the obvious danger of the situation. Would they suspect a setup? Would Harrison's usual criminal paranoia kick in and ruin the operation? I looked at the disposable burner phone resting on the glass coffee table, the designated contact number I had provided on the embossed invitation. The minutes dragged by in agonizing, suffocating suspense. If they refused to show up to the restaurant, the federal agents would still arrest them for the documented tax evasion, but they might manage to avoid the heaviest federal mandates and slip through the cracks of the justice system. We desperately needed them in that private dining room. We needed them to touch the digital transfer portal. Suddenly, the sharp, piercing chime of an incoming text message shattered the quiet focus of the living room. Every eye in the space snapped directly toward the burner phone resting on the glass table. My pulse hammered violently against my ribs. I reached forward, my fingers slightly trembling, and picked up the device. The screen illuminated brightly, displaying a new message notification from Audrey's personal cell phone number. I opened the text, my eyes rapidly scanning the harsh, vindictive words my sister had typed out. She did not offer a graceful acceptance of my surrender. She did not show a single ounce of hesitation, suspicion, or cautious restraint. Audrey texted back with the pure, toxic arrogance that had defined her entire miserable life. "It is about time you learned your place. Have the transfer documents ready, or we destroy your husband's company tomorrow." A wave of profound, icy calm washed over my entire body. They had taken the bait completely. Their insatiable greed and their desperate, pathetic need to see me humiliated had utterly blinded them to the reality of their impending destruction. I looked down at the glowing screen, reading the vicious threat one more time. I did not feel a shred of guilt, sadness, or lingering familial loyalty. They had eagerly dug their own graves, and now they were demanding the shovels. Cassidy smiles and hands the text to the IRS agent sitting in her living room. The following evening arrived with a chilling, electric anticipation. Laura. The city's most exclusive Michelin star restaurant was an absolute masterpiece of architectural revival. Elijah had poured months of his firm's elite craftsmanship into restoring the vaulted ceilings adorned with intricate gold leaf and the imported Italian marble floors that gleamed under the soft ambient lighting. Tonight, however, the establishment served an entirely different purpose. It was a gilded cage. We arrived an hour early to secure the perimeter. The restaurant was completely empty of civilian patrons. Every single person occupying the velvet booths, polishing the crystal glassware, and standing quietly by the kitchen doors was a highly trained federal agent. Agent Reyes posed as the sommelier, her earpiece cleverly disguised beneath her dark hair, while three other heavily armed operatives dressed as busboys meticulously wiped down the immaculate tables. The trap was flawlessly set, waiting only for the prey to step inside. Right on time, the heavy brass front doors swung open. Harrison, Diana, and Audrey made their grand entrance, and the sheer visual assault of their arrogance was staggering. They had dressed for a coronation. Harrison wore a garish, custom-tailored tuxedo with a silk lapel that screamed new money desperation, paired with a flashy gold watch he undoubtedly bought on fraudulent credit. He walked with his chest puffed out, surveying the empty dining room, with the smug satisfaction of a victorious king surveying his conquered territory. He truly believed his political connections and ruthless extortion had brought me to my knees. Diana was draped in a heavy, ostentatious fur coat. Despite the mild spring weather, her neck and wrists glittering with diamonds that Devon's forensic audit proved were purchased entirely on stolen funds. She immediately snapped her manicured fingers at an undercover federal agent posing as a host, demanding her coat be taken, and sneering at his perceived hesitation, completely unaware she was insulting a federal officer. Audrey was the absolute pinnacle of toxic narcissism. She strode into the private dining room wearing an aggressively bright sequined designer gown that looked more appropriate for a red carpet than a family reconciliation dinner. She did not even bother to greet us. Her phone was already held high in the air, the ring light attachment blindingly bright as she recorded a live video for her social media followers. She panned the camera around the private Michelin star dining room, her voice dripping with manufactured sugary sweetness. She boasted loudly to her audience about celebrating new acquisitions, upgrading her luxury lifestyle, and securing generational wealth, completely oblivious to the fact that her every word was being documented by the federal government for a wire fraud indictment. Elijah and I sat calmly on one side of the massive, polished mahogany dining table. I wore a simple, understated gray suit projecting the exact image of a defeated, exhausted woman waving a white flag. My hands rested flat on the table, still and submissive. Elijah sat beside me, completely relaxed, his broad shoulders resting against the leather chair, exuding a quiet strength. Devon sat quietly at the head of the table, slowly swirling a glass of expensive red wine, observing the spectacle with the detached fascination of a scientist watching rats enter a maze. Audrey shot Devon a dismissive, triumphant look, entirely convinced that her brilliant, elegant husband was simply there to act as her personal legal muscle to finalize my financial surrender. She had absolutely no idea that the man she had been embezzling from for years was the very architect of her impending destruction. Harrison did not bother pulling out a chair for his wife. He marched directly to the table and slammed his hands down on the polished wood looming over me with a predatory grin. He skipped the appetizers, the pleasantries, and the fake reconciliation entirely. He reached into his designer jacket and pulled out a sleek, high-tech tablet. He arrogantly slid the device across the mahogany table until it bumped directly against my water glass. The screen was already glowing brightly, displaying a highly complex encrypted banking portal connected to an overseas server. "Let us skip the emotional theatrics," Cassidy Harrison commanded, his voice laced with pure, unfiltered malice. "You lost. We won. You sent the invitation, so I assume you are finally ready to do the smart thing and save your pathetic little real estate brokerage. The offshore account routing numbers are already populated on the screen. Input your banking credentials, authorize the release of your grandfather's trust, and execute the transfer to Audrey's holding company. Do not waste my time." Diana leaned over Harrison's shoulder, her eyes gleaming with insatiable greed. "And you will do it right now," she hissed venomously. "You should be down on your knees thanking us for even allowing you to sit at the same table. We could have destroyed your husband's entire historical restoration company with one phone call to the zoning board. Be a good, obedient girl for once in your miserable life and sign over the money." I looked down at the tablet. The routing information was perfectly clear. It was an illicit offshore shell company, exactly the kind of account the IRS needed them to use to trigger a mandatory minimum federal prison sentence for international wire fraud. I slowly reached out and pulled the tablet closer to me. I let my hands tremble just slightly, playing the role of the broken daughter to absolute perfection. I typed in my authorized banking credentials, unlocking the primary access portal. The screen shifted to a bright green confirmation page. A single button pulsed in the center of the display. Transfer $20 million. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch across the private dining room. The undercover agents standing near the perimeter imperceptibly shifted their weight, ready to spring the trap. I looked up at Audrey. She was practically vibrating with excitement, her phone still recording the event, capturing her own federal crime in high definition. Elijah leaned forward, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, deep, and carried a chilling, unmistakable warning. He looked directly at Audrey, his dark eyes locking onto hers with intense scrutiny. "Are you absolutely sure you want to press confirm on that transfer?" Audrey Elijah asked smoothly, his tone deliberately casual. "I highly recommend you think about your next move very carefully. Once that transaction goes through, there is no going back." Audrey let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed shrilly off the vaulted ceiling. She snatched her phone, pointing the camera directly at Elijah's face, treating his warning like the ultimate joke. She sneered, her face twisted with absolute toxic arrogance. She reached across the mahogany table and aggressively snatched the tablet right out of my hands. "Give me the tablet, you glorified handyman," Audrey spat, her voice dripping with ultimate superiority. "I am taking what belongs to me." Without a single second of hesitation, she pressed the button. The screen of the high-tech tablet immediately flashed a brilliant, undeniable emerald green. A sharp, cheerful digital chime echoed through the silent private dining room, signaling the absolute completion of the transaction. The money was gone. Audrey let out a breathless, euphoric squeal of pure triumph. She held her recording smartphone higher, capturing every single angle of her perceived victory, her face glowing with a toxic, unfiltered joy. She shoved the tablet back across the polished mahogany table, making sure it stopped right in front of my face so I could see the confirmation screen glowing brightly. "You are officially broke, Cassidy." Audrey sneered, her voice echoing shrilly off the gold leaf ceiling. "You are completely useless now. You brought this entirely on yourself. You thought you could actually play games with the big leagues, but you are just a pathetic, washed-up real estate agent who married a glorified handyman. We have the $20 million trust fund and you have absolutely nothing left. This is what happens when you disrespect your own family." Harrison threw his head back and let out a booming, arrogant laugh that rattled the expensive crystal wine glasses on the table. He reached over and proudly patted Audrey on the shoulder, treating her like a conquering general who had just won a massive war against a bitter enemy. He pulled his tailored tuxedo jacket straight and looked down his nose at Elijah and me with utter disdain. "I warned you not to test my authority." Harrison boasted, his chest puffed out with manufactured superiority. "Let this be a permanent lesson to both of you. You do not ever bet against this family. I hold the power in this city and I can crush your little construction projects with a single phone call." Diana was practically vibrating with malicious delight. She leaned over her pristine dinner plate, her heavy diamond necklaces catching the ambient light, and glared at me with absolute contempt. "You should be on your knees showing some gratitude right now," Cassidy, Diana hissed venomously. "You should be immensely grateful that we are even allowing you to sit at the same table as us tonight. We could have ruined you completely, but we showed you mercy by letting you hand over the money quietly. Now take your working-class husband and get out of our sight before we call security to have you escorted to the parking lot where you belong." The sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating from my family was staggering. They had just committed what they believed was a $20 million extortion, and they were celebrating it like a national holiday. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not show a single ounce of the devastation they so desperately wanted to see. I simply sat back in my plush leather chair and glanced over at Devon. My brilliant brother-in-law was casually swirling the expensive red wine in his crystal glass, a look of profound, chilling satisfaction resting on his handsome face. Elijah remained perfectly still beside me, a dangerous, knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The trap had closed. The steel jaws had snapped shut with bone-crushing force, and my family had not even felt the impact yet. I reached out with steady hands and picked up my pristine white linen napkin. I casually wiped my mouth, folding the fabric with deliberate, agonizing slowness, letting the heavy silence stretch until the triumphant grins on my parents' faces began to falter with sudden confusion. I set the napkin down on the table, folded my hands neatly, and looked directly into my mother's eyes. "I did not transfer the trust fund, Mom," I stated, my voice ringing with a cold, absolute authority that stripped the air right out of the room. "I just transferred the exact amount of money you stole from my business accounts back to myself." Audrey stopped recording instantly. Her phone dropped a few inches as her manufactured smile froze completely. "What are you talking about?" Audrey stammered, her voice suddenly sounding very small and terribly unsure. "I watched you log in. I pressed the confirmation button myself." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the mahogany table, making sure my next words carried the heavy weight of a death sentence. "Yes, Audrey, you did press the button," I confirmed smoothly. "And that is exactly what we needed you to do. You see, the account you just authorized that transfer from was not my brokerage account, and it certainly was not Grandpa William's trust fund. That was your secret offshore shell company. The exact same illicit offshore account you and Dad have been using to launder stolen money and hide assets from the federal government." Harrison lunged forward and snatched the tablet off the table. His eyes darted frantically across the glowing green confirmation screen, reading the routing numbers and the specific account details displayed in bold black text. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. The tablet slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor with a sharp crack. He realized instantly what had just happened. By pressing that button, Audrey had willingly and voluntarily initiated a massive unauthorized electronic transfer across state lines, using a documented shell account. She had just provided undeniable time-stamped digital proof of active, ongoing malicious intent. She had executed a textbook case of federal wire fraud right in front of a dozen witnesses, and she had even filmed herself doing it to guarantee her own conviction. Diana opened her mouth to scream, but the sound never materialized. A heavy, ominous mechanical click echoed loudly through the private dining area. The massive double mahogany doors leading out to the main restaurant corridor had just been locked from the outside. The soft, ambient classical music that had been playing through the overhead speakers abruptly cut off, leaving a ringing, terrifying silence in its wake. The atmosphere in the room shifted from luxurious to lethal in a fraction of a second. The highly attentive waitstaff, the sommelier who had been pouring water, and the busboys clearing the perimeter tables suddenly stopped moving. They dropped their subservient postures entirely. Moving with terrifying synchronized military precision, the undercover operatives stepped away from the walls. They stood up completely straight, their eyes locking onto Harrison, Diana, and Audrey with cold, predatory focus. Without saying a single word, the waiters simultaneously reached their hands inside their tailored uniform jackets. They were not reaching for order pads or wine keys. They were reaching for their standard-issue service weapons and federal badges. They were not waiters. They were undercover federal agents, and the long-awaited raid on my family's criminal empire had officially begun right in the middle of their lavish dinner. The man who had just poured Harrison a generous glass of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon stepped smoothly to the head of the polished mahogany table. He did not reach for any hidden weapon, but instead pulled a slim black leather wallet from the inside breast pocket of his perfectly tailored suit vest. He flipped it open with a sharp, practiced flick of his wrist. A heavy gold shield caught the warm ambient light of the glittering crystal chandeliers hanging high above us. He was Agent Reyes' commanding officer and the lead field investigator for this entire undercover operation. His voice, when he finally spoke, possessed the cold, rigid, uncompromising authority of the federal government. He identified himself as a special agent of the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. The collective gasp from my family sucked the remaining oxygen right out of the opulent dining room. The agent did not blink as he looked directly at my father. He announced in a voice that carried absolute finality that Harrison, Diana, and Audrey were currently the primary subjects of an active and massive federal investigation. He listed their specific criminal charges with surgical, devastating precision. He cited multiple counts of federal wire fraud based on the transaction Audrey had just willingly executed. He cited years of willful corporate tax evasion and interstate money laundering through their various fake charities. And finally, he cited the most damning and severe charge of all felony elder extortion against my grandfather. Audrey dropped her expensive, brightly colored smartphone directly onto the table. The device landed with a loud, sharp clatter, the camera lens now staring blindly up at the gold leaf ceiling. Her carefully curated, highly artificial influencer persona completely evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a terrified, trembling woman who suddenly realized she had just broadcast her own federal crime to thousands of live followers. She began to hyperventilate, clutching her chest as the severe reality of a maximum security prison sentence washed over her. Diana pressed both of her trembling hands tightly against her throat. Her heavy diamond necklaces suddenly looked less like symbols of immense social wealth and more like the glittering, inescapable chains of her impending incarceration. She shook her head frantically back and forth, her perfectly highlighted hair falling wildly out of place. She stammered desperately that this was an absurd, catastrophic mistake. She yelled that they were prominent, highly respected members of the Oak Ridge Country Club, and that wealthy, influential people like them simply did not get treated this way by law enforcement. The federal agent ignored her entitled protests completely. He offered no sympathy and no negotiation. He simply signaled to the other undercover operatives stationed strategically around the room. The agents moved with swift, synchronized tactical efficiency. They abandoned their disguises, securing the perimeter of the room and physically blocking the only exit leading toward the restaurant kitchens. The heavy double doors leading to the main lobby remained firmly locked. There was absolutely no way out. The private, lavish dining room of the most exclusive Michelin star restaurant in the city had officially and legally become a federal holding cell. Harrison finally snapped out of his paralyzed state of shock. The arrogant king of the country club realized his entire empire of lies and stolen money was crumbling into worthless dust right before his eyes. A raw, animalistic panic overtook his fragile, inflated ego. He knocked his heavy wooden dining chair backward so violently that it crashed loudly onto the imported Italian marble floor. He lunged wildly toward the heavy brass doors we had originally entered through, desperate to escape the devastating consequences of his decades of financial abuse and manipulation. But he did not make it more than 2 steps across the room. Elijah moved with the blinding speed and raw, undeniable power of a man who spent his entire life building massive historical estates with his own 2 hands. He stepped effortlessly and smoothly directly into Harrison's path of escape. Elijah did not raise a fist, draw a weapon, or act with any unnecessary aggression. He simply planted his heavy work boots firmly on the polished marble floor and stood incredibly tall. His broad, muscular frame created an impenetrable, solid wall of physical resistance that no desperate man could ever hope to break through. Harrison slammed directly into Elijah's solid chest and bounced off immediately, stumbling backward in sheer shock and physical defeat. He looked up, his eyes wide with fear. Elijah looked down at the older man, his dark eyes utterly devoid of any mercy or sympathy. "Sit down, Harrison," Elijah commanded, his voice rumbling like grinding gravel and echoing with absolute authority. "The adults are talking." Harrison visibly withered under Elijah's imposing, unyielding presence. The frantic fight drained completely out of his body. He sank back into his seat, his face pale and glistening with a cold, terrified sweat. The harsh, undeniable reality of spending his remaining years inside a federal penitentiary was staring him right in the face. Diana, realizing that her husband was entirely defeated and that her golden child daughter was hyperventilating in a state of catatonic shock, turned her frantic, wild eyes toward the only person at the table she genuinely believed could save them from destruction. She looked at the brilliant, highly successful African-American corporate attorney, sitting quietly at the far end of the mahogany table. Diana pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at him, her face twisted in pure desperation. "Devin," Diana screamed hysterically, her shrill voice shattering the tense, heavy silence of the locked room. "You are a highly paid lawyer. Do something right now. Stand up and protect your wife. Order these federal agents out of this room immediately. You have the legal power to stop this. Do not just sit there." Devin did not even flinch at her shrieking, incredibly entitled demands. He did not show a single ounce of fear or urgency. He took one final, incredibly slow sip of his expensive red wine, savoring the taste, and then set the crystal glass down on the table with deliberate, agonizing care. He slowly stood up from his leather chair, towering over the chaotic scene. He smoothed the lapels of his custom charcoal suit and calmly straightened his silk tie. His handsome face remained completely unreadable, a flawless mask of pure legal calculation and ultimate retribution. He reached a steady, confident hand down into his custom leather briefcase. The metallic snap of the heavy brass latches echoed like gunfire through the tense, frozen atmosphere of the private dining room. Diana continued to stare at him with wide, demanding eyes, fully expecting her wealthy son-in-law to magically wave away the armed federal agents surrounding their table. Devin pulled out a massive stack of legal documents securely bound by a thick black clip. He walked deliberately around the edge of the polished mahogany table, his footsteps slow and measured until he stopped right behind Audrey's leather chair. Audrey looked up at him, her face streaked with ruined makeup, her breath catching in her throat as a new wave of panic set in. Devin dropped the enormous stack of papers directly onto her pristine porcelain dinner plate. The heavy thud made the fine china rattle aggressively against the hardwood table. "I am a lawyer," Diana Devin stated, his deep voice ringing with chilling clarity that commanded the entire room. "But I certainly do not represent you or your miserable criminal enterprise." He turned his attention down to his trembling wife, his expression utterly devoid of warmth. These are divorce papers, Audrey. Devin reached back into his spacious briefcase and produced a second equally massive stack of bound documents. He slammed them down right next to the first pile, knocking over a crystal water glass. And this is the complete forensic audit, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that you systematically embezzled money from my private accounts to fund your parents' failing Ponzi scheme. Audrey stared down at the towering piles of legal paper resting on her dinner plate. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, completely incapable of formulating a coherent response. Diana let out a strangled gasp, slumping back into her chair as the final pillar of her false reality shattered into pieces. Devin did not raise his voice to shout. He did not need to. The sheer weight of his strategic execution spoke for itself. As a senior corporate and tax attorney, I deal with complex asset liquidation on a daily basis, Devin explained flawlessly, pacing slowly behind Audrey's chair like a shark circling its bleeding prey. When I noticed the first unauthorized withdrawal from my offshore holdings 6 months ago, I did not confront you. I did not ask for an explanation or demand a fake apology. I went straight to work. I spent half a year quietly and entirely legally dismantling every single piece of our shared financial life. I legally dissolved our joint banking accounts, funneled my personal wealth into impenetrable blind trusts, and deliberately left you holding the bag for every single luxury purchase you made under your own name. All those designer clothes, the extravagant international vacations, the massive cash transfers you made to Harrison to keep up appearances at the country club, they were all charged to lines of credit established solely under your social security number. Harrison watched in stunned, miserable silence as Devin expertly dismantled his golden child. The undercover federal agents surrounding the perimeter of the room remained perfectly still, allowing the brilliant attorney to deliver the final nail in the coffin before they initiated the physical arrests. "You thought you were outsmarting me," Devin continued, his tone dripping with absolute freezing contempt that made Audrey physically flinch. "You thought you could use my hard-earned capital to prop up your parents' fake crumbling empire. But you are not a criminal mastermind, Audrey. You are just a spoiled, arrogant woman who left a digital paper trail a mile wide. I made sure that when the Internal Revenue Service finally came knocking at your door, there would be an impenetrable legal firewall between my protected assets and your blatant, sloppy fraud. You are walking out of this marriage with absolutely nothing. No alimony payments, no quiet settlement, no hidden financial safety net. The only things you legally own right now are the staggering debts you accrued to fund your fake influencer lifestyle and the massive federal wire fraud indictment you just handed to the United States government on a silver platter." Audrey began to shake violently, her hands gripping the edges of her chair. The complete realization of her total financial ruin crashed over her like a tidal wave. She looked frantically around the room, desperately searching for an exit, a legal loophole, or a savior that simply did not exist. Audrey slammed her hands against the edge of the heavy mahogany table, pushing herself up from her leather chair in a sudden burst of frantic energy. Her carefully styled hair was a tangled mess, and her expensive sequined designer gown suddenly looked like a cheap, ill-fitting costume. "You cannot do this to me!" Audrey screamed, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated hysteria as she pointed a shaking finger at Devin. "I will not let you take everything away from me. I am still a highly successful public relations director. I still have my own thriving company. I have a lucrative business, and I still have my luxury penthouse overlooking the financial district. I do not need your money, Devin. I will rebuild my public relations firm, and I will live in my gorgeous penthouse, and I will hire my own ruthless defense attorneys to destroy you in court." Her desperate, shrill declaration hung pathetically in the stagnant air of the locked dining room. She was clinging to the very last shreds of her fabricated elite status, completely unaware that the floor had already entirely collapsed beneath her feet. Elijah, who had been sitting quietly beside me, observing the utter destruction of my toxic family with a look of profound, immense satisfaction, finally shifted his weight. He placed his elbows on the polished wood, steepling his large calloused hands together. He looked directly at Audrey, his dark, intense eyes locking onto her frantic, tear-stained face. Elijah leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut right through her hysterical screaming. "About that penthouse." "Audrey." Elijah paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch across the private dining room before delivering the final, crushing blow. He leaned back in his leather chair, resting his hands casually on the polished mahogany table, radiating the absolute authority of a man who held the fate of her entire world in his calloused palms. "You assumed my business was limited to swinging hammers and fixing old floorboards." Elijah stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that demanded absolute attention. "You were so blinded by your own toxic arrogance that you never bothered to actually understand how commercial real estate development operates on a macroeconomic scale. When my firm revitalizes a historical district, we do not just buy individual brick and mortar buildings. We buy the surrounding financial infrastructure. We acquire distressed debt portfolios from major regional banks to secure our development footprint." Audrey stared at him, her manicured hands trembling violently against the edge of the table. The frantic, desperate defiance in her eyes was rapidly giving way to a profound, paralyzing terror. She did not fully grasp the legal terminology Elijah was using, but the predatory confidence in his tone told her everything she needed to know. "2 weeks ago, my acquisitions team purchased a massive portfolio of non-performing residential mortgages from your primary lender." Elijah continued, his dark eyes locking onto hers with ruthless precision. "The bank was desperately trying to offload highly toxic defaulted assets. Among those hundreds of distressed properties was a certain luxury penthouse overlooking the financial district. A penthouse owned by a public relations director who has not made a single mortgage payment in over 4 months because she was too busy funneling her embezzled cash into her father's failing Ponzi scheme." The color completely drained from Audrey's face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She opened her mouth to argue, to scream that she had equity to demand her legal rights, but her vocal cords completely failed her. "You do not own that penthouse anymore," Audrey Elijah declared, delivering the absolute devastating truth. "I own the mortgage to your luxury property. I hold the exclusive deed, and because you are in severe incurable default, the real estate is already legally mine." Harrison let out a strangled, furious gasp, his hands clenching into useless fists on his lap. Diana simply stared at Elijah with wide, horrified eyes, her diamond necklaces suddenly feeling like a heavy, suffocating noose around her neck. They had spent years treating my husband like a mindless, uneducated laborer, and now he was systematically dismantling their golden child's entire existence with the terrifying efficiency of a corporate titan. "You called me a carpenter?" Elijah says smoothly, leaning forward so his face was just inches from the glowing tablet that had sealed their federal indictment. "Well, I do know how to dismantle a house. Your penthouse is currently in foreclosure. My crews are changing the locks as we speak. You have until midnight to collect your designer bags from the curb." The absolute finality of his words struck Audrey like a physical bone-crushing blow. The pristine, highly curated influencer lifestyle she had viciously guarded and weaponized against me for her entire life was completely vaporized. She had no husband to bail her out. She had no secret offshore accounts to rely on. She had no public relations firm to generate income. And now she literally did not have a bed to sleep in. She was entirely, profoundly destitute, and she had exactly 1 evening to salvage whatever clothes my construction workers tossed onto the dirty city sidewalk. Audrey completely broke down. The polished, superior facade she had worn like impenetrable armor shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She fell backward into her dining chair, clutching her chest as violent, erratic gasps tore from her throat. She was hyperventilating, her eyes rolling back slightly as her brain entirely short-circuited under the sheer crushing weight of her immediate reality. She clawed at the collar of her expensive sequined gown, completely unable to draw a full breath, letting out high-pitched, panicked wheezes that echoed pathetically across the gold leaf ceiling. Diana watched her golden, perfect daughter collapse into a hyperventilating, broken mess. The matriarch of our toxic family realized that every single layer of her elite social standing, her stolen wealth, and her manufactured superiority was gone forever. The sheer psychological shock of the federal raid combined with the absolute financial annihilation of her favorite child was simply too much for her fragile, narcissistic mind to process. Diana let out a soft, breathy moan, her eyes fluttering shut. She slumped violently to the side, fainting dead away in her chair. Her head hit the mahogany table with a dull thud, her expensive fur coat slipping off her shoulders and pooling uselessly on the imported Italian marble floor. Harrison erupted. The sight of his wife unconscious and his golden child hyperventilating pushed his unhinged, desperate rage past the breaking point. He roared a guttural sound of pure, venomous fury and lunged violently across the table toward Elijah. He knocked over crystal wine glasses and porcelain plates, his hands outstretched, intending to physically assault the man who had just legally destroyed his entire legacy. He never even made it halfway across the table. The undercover federal agents moved with blinding, ruthless speed. The lead agent grabbed Harrison by the collar of his custom-tailored tuxedo, violently yanking him backward. Harrison thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities, demanding respect, and threatening to call the mayor. The agents did not care about his political connections or his country club status. A second heavily armed operative grabbed Harrison's flailing arms, twisting them sharply behind his back. The heavy, unmistakable click of steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed fiercely through the chaotic dining room. He was violently slammed face first against the polished mahogany wood, his cheek pressed right next to the spilled red wine that looked incredibly like blood. The lead agent forcefully held him down, securing the heavy steel cuffs tightly around his wrists, ensuring the disgraced patriarch could not move a single inch. I sat perfectly still, watching the magnificent, chaotic destruction unfold right before my eyes. The opulent private dining room, once a symbol of their supreme arrogance, had transformed into the exact site of their ultimate demise. The expensive crystal lay shattered, the fine wine soaked into the pristine white linens. The sheer perfection of the double karma left them absolutely ruined. They had built a massive, glittering empire entirely on cruelty, deceit, and stolen money, believing they were completely untouchable. Now surrounded by federal agents and drowning in their own catastrophic hubris, they were finally experiencing the exact devastating justice they had so eagerly tried to evade. The news cycle hit the city like a Category 5 hurricane. It took exactly 72 hours for the carefully manicured facade of my family's elite status to be reduced to absolute radioactive ash. Local news stations ran the story continuously, leading their evening broadcasts with sensational headlines detailing the massive federal raid at Laura. The spectacle of prominent country club members being escorted out of a Michelin star restaurant in handcuffs was simply too delicious for the media to ignore. The real devastation, however, unfolded on the digital battlefield. Audrey's hastily constructed, heavily filtered smear campaign against me backfired with spectacular, catastrophic precision. The very same social media audience that she had manipulated into attacking my real estate brokerage turned on her the second the federal indictment details were unsealed. The Internal Revenue Service, typically tight-lipped, issued a highly unusual and detailed press release confirming the charges of elder extortion and wire fraud. They explicitly outlined the scheme to steal a $20 million trust fund from a vulnerable 82-year-old man. Audrey was violently, completely canceled overnight. The internet, realizing it had been weaponized to protect a federal criminal, demanded blood. Every single one of her high-paying public relations clients dropped her firm within 24 hours, terrified of the catastrophic brand damage associated with elder abuse. Her social media accounts were flooded with tens of thousands of furious comments exposing her fake influencer lifestyle and condemning her horrifying actions. The corporate sponsors who provided her designer clothes and luxury vacations immediately severed all ties, issuing public statements distancing themselves from her toxic brand. She went from a celebrated socialite to a complete, utter pariah in the span of a single weekend. While the media circus raged outside, our focus was entirely on securing Grandpa William. Elijah utilized his elite development firm to rapidly retrofit a stunning sunlit wing of our estate. It was transformed into a private, luxurious sanctuary, specifically tailored to William's medical needs, complete with 24-hour specialized cardiac care and state-of-the-art monitoring equipment. He was finally safe, surrounded by people who genuinely loved him rather than vultures waiting to pick his bones clean. Late on a Tuesday evening, the doorbell rang. It was Devin. He stepped into our foyer carrying his signature leather briefcase, but he looked fundamentally different. The heavy, oppressive weight of his toxic marriage was completely gone. He looked lighter, energized, and profoundly relieved. Devin walked into the customized medical suite where Grandpa William was resting comfortably reading a novel. Devin smiled warmly and handed my grandfather a thick, sealed legal folder. "That is the finalized permanent protective order," Devin announced, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute victory. "Audrey and your parents are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of you, Cassidy or Elijah. And more importantly, the $20 million trust fund is now completely locked down under an impenetrable federal hold until the criminal trial concludes." We moved into our spacious living room, pouring generous glasses of expensive scotch to celebrate the final decisive severing of ties. Devin sank into one of the plush armchairs, letting out a long, satisfied sigh. "The divorce is proceeding faster than anticipated," Devin told us, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Audrey's high-priced defense attorneys dropped her the second they realized she had absolutely zero access to capital to pay their exorbitant retainer fees. She is currently relying on a wildly overworked public defender to navigate multiple federal felony charges. The sheer beautiful irony is that she is completely bankrupt entirely alone and facing a mandatory minimum sentence without a single luxury asset to her name. Elijah clinked his glass against Devin's, a rare, genuine smile crossing his rugged features. "And the eviction from the penthouse went exactly as planned," Elijah added smoothly. "My crews changed the locks right at midnight." Audrey managed to salvage 3 trash bags worth of clothes before she was permanently locked out. She is currently staying in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city using the very last of her available credit. I sat back on the sofa, savoring the absolute, undeniable justice of it all. They had tried to destroy my livelihood, steal my grandfather's fortune, and throw me to the wolves of public opinion. Instead, they had perfectly engineered their own total annihilation. The playing field wasn't just leveled, it had been completely obliterated and rebuilt on my terms. We spent the next hour discussing the future, making plans to integrate my booming real estate brokerage with Elijah's historical restoration firm, creating a massive, unstoppable development powerhouse. We were finally free to build our empire without the constant draining sabotage of my toxic parents. Just as Devin was gathering his briefcase to leave, my personal cell phone vibrated sharply on the glass coffee table. The caller ID displayed an unknown out-of-state number. I frowned, picking up the device. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before pressing answer and putting the call on speakerphone so Elijah and Devin could hear. An automated, distinctly robotic voice filled the quiet living room. "You have a collect call from an inmate at the county detention center. Press 1 to accept charges." I pressed the button. "Cassidy, please, you have to help me." A desperate, frantic voice pleaded through the static connection. It was Harrison. The former king of the Oak Ridge Country Club sounded absolutely broken, his arrogant bravado entirely stripped away by the harsh reality of a concrete holding cell. "Cassidy, listen to me," Harrison begged, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "The federal magistrate denied my request for release on recognizance. They consider me a severe flight risk because of the offshore accounts. They set my bail at $500,000. I need you to post the bond, Cassidy. I cannot stay in here. Please, you have to wire the money right now." The speakerphone amplified every ragged, desperate breath my father took inside that federal holding facility. I sat perfectly still on my plush living room sofa. I did not yell, I did not cry. I did not feel a single ounce of the crushing guilt that had dictated my entire childhood. I looked at Elijah, who sat beside me like an immovable mountain of support, and then at Devin, who watched the phone with the cold, analytical gaze of a prosecutor witnessing a guilty verdict. Cassidy. Please, Harrison begged, his voice stripped of all the country club arrogance and false bravado. The food here is inedible. The guards treat me like an animal. I am sleeping on a thin mattress over a slab of freezing concrete. You have to wire the $500,000 to my bail bondsman. I know we had our disagreements, but I am your father. Family must stick together in times of crisis. We have to protect our own blood. I let his pathetic, manipulative plea hang in the quiet, elegant space of my home. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute freedom of the moment. For 33 years, this man had belittled my ambitions, drained my finances, and actively tried to destroy my husband's multi-million-dollar development firm. He had weaponized the concept of family to justify extortion fraud and emotional abuse. I leaned forward, bringing my face closer to the phone. My voice emerged with an icy professional detachment that I had honed in high-stakes commercial real estate negotiations. You are not calling your daughter right now, Harrison, I stated evenly, completely dropping the title of father. You are calling a woman you tried to frame for elder abuse. You are calling the business owner whose corporate accounts you illegally froze. You are calling the wife of the man you tried to run off the highway. Cassidy. I am sorry, Harrison sobbed loudly into the receiver. The sound of his weeping was jarring, a pathetic display from a man who had demanded total submission from everyone around him. I was desperate. I made terrible mistakes. But I am begging you to show some mercy. Your mother is locked in a separate federal wing and she is terrified. We need your help. We are family. Family forgives. The sheer audacity of his request solidified my resolve into unbreakable steel. There would be no toxic forgiveness today. There would be no sweeping decades of psychological torment under the rug just because the perpetrator was finally experiencing the consequences of his own malicious actions. You told me just a few days ago that I owed this family for raising me. I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy. You demanded that I pay my dues by sacrificing my business, my marriage, and my grandfather's life to fund your fraudulent lifestyle. Well, Harrison, consider the debt fully paid. I paused, making sure he heard every single syllable of my final judgment. I am not your financial safety net. I am not your punching bag. And I am certainly not your family anymore. Enjoy your new concrete room, Harrison. I hear the federal government is incredibly strict about collecting their dues. No, wait, Cassidy, please do not hang up. Harrison screamed, raw panic tearing through his voice. I pressed the red end call button on the screen. The connection severed instantly, cutting off his frantic begging mid-sentence. I immediately opened my contact settings, selected his phone number, and tapped the block caller option. A small prompt asked me to confirm the permanent restriction. I pressed confirm without a fraction of a second of hesitation. I repeated the exact same process for my mother's number. The boundary was now absolute, impenetrable, and permanent. The era of their toxic manipulation was officially over. Elijah reached out and placed his large, warm hand over mine. He did not offer empty platitudes. He simply offered his unwavering, solid presence. Devin raised his glass of scotch in a silent, respectful toast to my absolute liberation. The heavy, suffocating shadow that had followed me since childhood had finally lifted, leaving behind a profound, unshakable peace. I leaned back against the sofa cushions, breathing in the quiet, secure atmosphere of my home, knowing that I would never again allow their poison to infiltrate my sanctuary. Across the city, far away from our secure and thriving estate, the brutal reality of our new dynamic was playing out in a much grimmer setting. The rain fell in freezing, relentless sheets over a run-down, dilapidated motel, located on the absolute fringes of the industrial district. The neon vacancy sign buzzed aggressively, casting a sickly, flickering red glow over the cracked asphalt parking lot. It was a bleak, unforgiving environment that offered absolutely zero comfort to its transient occupants. Audrey pushed open the cheap hollow wooden door of room 112. She stepped out into the freezing downpour, entirely unrecognizable from the glamorous, arrogant socialite who had sneered at my husband just days prior. Her perfectly highlighted hair was matted and plastered to her cheeks by the rain. She wore a pair of oversized, stained sweatpants and a faded hoodie completely stripped of the expensive designer gowns and flashy diamond jewelry she had proudly flaunted at the Michelin star restaurant. She shivered violently against the biting wind, leaning her weight against the rusted metal railing of the motel walkway. She reached back into the dingy, foul-smelling room and dragged out a heavy black plastic trash bag. It snagged on the doorframe, tearing slightly to reveal a jumbled mess of the few casual clothing items she had managed to shove inside before Elijah's construction crews had legally changed the locks on her luxury penthouse. Audrey gritted her teeth and yanked the torn garbage bag forward, dragging it roughly down the concrete stairs. She turned back and retrieved a second equally heavy trash bag, her manicured nails chipping and breaking against the cheap plastic material. She had no luxury SUV waiting for her. She had no high-powered public relations clients calling to offer support. She had no secret offshore accounts to rely on. The federal authorities had systematically frozen every single financial asset tied to her name, and her elite influencer network had abandoned her the second the elder extortion charges became public knowledge. She dragged the two trash bags through the muddy, oil-stained puddles of the motel parking lot, heading toward a rusted, dented sedan she had been forced to rent with the absolute last of her available cash. Her entire empire of lies, built carefully on stolen trust funds and manufactured superiority, had vaporized into nothingness. She popped the trunk of the cheap rental car and hoisted the trash bags inside, slamming the lid shut with a dull, pathetic thud. She stood alone in the freezing rain, completely ruined, as the flashing neon vacancy sign buzzed relentlessly above her head, signaling the absolute permanent end of her luxurious, fabricated existence. 3 months passed. The dark, freezing rain of Audrey's miserable motel parking lot gave way to the brilliant golden sunshine of a perfect late summer afternoon. I stood on the sweeping limestone terrace of a breathtaking 1920s Tudor Revival estate, breathing in the warm, fragrant air. The sprawling property was the absolute crown jewel of Elijah's historical restoration portfolio, a massive architectural masterpiece that his firm had spent the last 2 years painstakingly bringing back to its original, magnificent glory. My real estate brokerage was no longer just surviving the fallout of my family's criminal sabotage, it was utterly dominating the local luxury market. Elijah and I had officially merged our professional forces into an unstoppable powerhouse. My firm became the exclusive listing agency for every single elite commercial and residential property his development group restored. The high-net-worth clients who had hastily backed out of their contracts during Audrey's fabricated viral smear campaign had returned practically begging for representation once the explosive federal indictments hit the evening news. Our corporate synergy was undeniable, our profit margins had tripled, and we were completely untouchable. Today, however, we were not negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts or navigating complex escrow accounts. We were celebrating our absolute liberation. We threw a massive, joyful backyard barbecue to commemorate the completion of the Tudor estate, and the stark contrast between this gathering and the highly toxic, miserable country club event my parents had hosted 3 months prior could not have been more profound. There were no fake socialites judging each other over crystal wine glasses. There were no hushed passive-aggressive insults, no desperate attempts to maintain a fabricated elite status, and absolutely no suffocating tension. The sprawling, perfectly manicured lawn was packed tightly with genuine hard-working people who had stood by our side when the federal dust finally settled. Elijah's lead construction foreman, master carpenters, and logistics directors mingled freely and happily with my top producing real estate agents, escrow officers, and legal consultants. The air was thick with the rich, smoky scent of roasting meat, accompanied by the loud, unfiltered sound of authentic booming laughter and upbeat music playing from hidden outdoor speakers. Children ran joyfully through the automated lawn sprinklers, while adults relaxed comfortably on the custom teak patio furniture, holding cold beers and sharing genuine stories. This was our chosen family. It was an impenetrable, fiercely protected circle of loyalty and mutual respect that no amount of stolen trust fund money could ever hope to buy. I walked gracefully down the wide limestone steps, holding a tall glass of iced tea, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace settling deep into my bones. Near the edge of the expansive terrace, shielded comfortably from the bright afternoon sun by the canopy of a massive oak tree, Grandpa William sat in a plush wicker armchair. The fragile, terrified old man we had desperately rescued from that horrific off-the-grid nursing facility was completely gone. In his place sat a robust, incredibly sharp-witted patriarch whose failing heart had been completely stabilized by top-tier medical care, proper medication, and a totally stress-free environment. He looked incredibly healthy today, his cheeks carrying a warm, lively flush as he enjoyed his absolute freedom. Grandpa William was leaning intently over a beautifully hand-carved wooden chessboard, locked in a highly competitive strategic battle of wits with Devin. My former brother-in-law looked completely revitalized and free of the heavy, oppressive burden his marriage had placed on him. The rigid, intimidating corporate armor Devin usually wore into federal courtrooms was nowhere in sight. Today, he sported a casual, relaxed linen button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled comfortably up to his elbows, exposing his expensive watch. Devin threw his head back and laughed heartily as Grandpa William executed a flawless, aggressive knight maneuver, expertly trapping Devin's queen on the board. They had formed an unbreakable, unique bond over the past 3 months, united by their shared brilliance, their mutual respect, and their flawless execution of my family's total legal and financial destruction. Grandpa William now legally and safely controlled his own $20 million trust fund, and Devin was the trusted legal advisor ensuring that no one would ever attempt to exploit the elderly man again. I left the intense chess match behind and made my way across the vibrant green lawn toward the massive custom-built outdoor kitchen area. Elijah stood firmly planted in front of the enormous industrial grill, expertly flipping thick-cut steaks and joking loudly with his lead project managers. He was wearing exactly what he had worn on the day my sister had so foolishly and arrogantly insulted him. He wore a faded, incredibly soft flannel shirt, with the sleeves pushed up over his muscular forearms, heavily worn denim jeans, and those thick, scuffed leather work boots. But the entire context of his clothing had been completely permanently inverted. No one in this sprawling backyard looked at those dusty work boots with disdain or misplaced snobby superiority. The highly skilled professionals surrounding him looked at Elijah with absolute unadulterated respect and deep admiration. They knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the humble man wielding the metal grill tongs was a quiet, lethal corporate titan who commanded a massive development empire and, more importantly, a fiercely loyal husband who would gladly tear down a building with his bare hands to protect the people he loved. Elijah spotted me walking toward him through the lively crowd. His rugged, handsome face broke into a breathtaking, genuine smile that reached all the way to his dark, observant eyes. He handed the metal grill tongs to his lead foreman with a quick nod and stepped entirely away from the billowing smoke. He closed the distance between us, pulling me effortlessly into his broad chest for a warm, fiercely secure embrace. I wrapped my arms around his neck, inhaling the comforting scent of wood smoke, expensive cologne, and the crisp autumn air. I rested my chin against his shoulder, looking out over the magnificent estate he had built and the incredible chosen family we had gathered together. We had survived the ultimate betrayal, completely eradicated the toxic poison from our lives, and built a beautiful, impenetrable fortress of success right over their ruined legacy. I pulled back slightly from Elijah's warm embrace, leaving my hands resting comfortably against his chest. He pressed a soft kiss to my forehead, his dark eyes communicating a silent, profound understanding of everything we had overcome to reach this exact beautiful moment. I smiled, giving his soft flannel shirt a gentle tug before stepping back to let him return to his crew at the grill. I wandered slowly away from the immediate heat of the outdoor kitchen, strolling toward the quiet edge of the immaculate limestone terrace. The booming, joyful laughter of the construction foreman and the animated, relaxed chatter of my real estate agents blended into a harmonious, incredibly comforting background hum. I leaned my forearms against the sturdy stone balustrade, letting the cool, fragrant evening breeze wash over my face as I surveyed the sprawling, vibrant scene spread out across the manicured green lawn. Over by the massive oak tree, Grandpa William had just decisively checkmated Devon yet again. Both men were laughing, a sound so rich and entirely unburdened that it brought a fierce, protective warmth to my chest. I watched my elite brokerage team sharing cold drinks and trading stories with the heavy machinery operators and historical restoration specialists. There were no forced, tight-lipped smiles here. There was no desperate social climbing, no aggressive whispering behind expensive designer handbags, and absolutely no suffocating expectation to perform a fabricated, flawless role for the benefit of judgmental strangers. For over 3 decades, I had been rigidly conditioned to believe that family was an inescapable life sentence. I was systematically taught that shared DNA was a binding, non-negotiable contract that required me to absorb constant emotional abuse, financial extortion, and blatant disrespect just to keep a fragile, toxic peace. My parents had weaponized my loyalty since childhood, demanding that I constantly shrink myself down so my arrogant sister could appear larger. They had tried relentlessly to convince me that my worth was tied entirely to their conditional impossible-to-earn approval. And when I finally stopped playing their twisted manipulative game, they had actively tried to legally and financially bury me alive. But looking out at this vibrant, authentic gathering of incredible people, the absolute truth finally settled deep into my soul, eradicating the last lingering shadows of my past. Family is not blood. Blood just makes you related. Blood is nothing more than a biological coincidence, an accident of birth that guarantees absolutely nothing about loyalty or love. Family are the people who stand in front of you when the federal agents show up, refusing to let anyone tear you down. They are the people who shield you from the shrapnel when your entire world violently explodes. They are the ones who build you up, who celebrate your victories without a single ounce of toxic jealousy, and who actively push you to achieve your highest potential instead of plotting your ruin behind your back. True family are the people who do not care if you wear a bespoke suit or a pair of dusty work boots, as long as you show up with genuine honesty and unshakable integrity. I had spent my entire life starving for validation at a table where the game was completely rigged against me from the very start. I had accepted the tiny, poisonous scraps of affection my parents occasionally threw my way, falsely believing that was all I deserved. But the exact moment I stopped begging for a seat at their miserable hollow table, I realized I possessed the supreme power to build my own. I looked back toward the outdoor kitchen, watching Elijah hand a perfectly cooked steak to his lead project manager with a booming laugh. My husband had never once asked me to compromise my fierce ambition. Devon had never asked Grandpa William to hide his sharp brilliance. We had forged a completely new, unbreakable legacy out of the radioactive ashes of a broken one. We had created an environment where immense success was shared, where vulnerability was fiercely protected, and where loyalty was proven daily through actions never demanded through guilt trips or financial manipulation. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a brilliant golden glow over the historical estate we had saved, mirroring the exact transformation of my own life. The heavy, suffocating shadow of my parents and my sister was permanently erased. They were locked away in concrete cells and cheap motels, entirely consumed by the consequences of their own malicious greed, while I was standing in the warm light of a future I had built with my own 2 hands. I turned away from the beautiful estate and looked directly forward, locking eyes with you, the person watching this right now. I know exactly how heavy that burden feels. I know the exhausting, soul-crushing weight of trying to please people who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you. I know what it is like to sit across from people who share your last name, yet treat you like their greatest enemy. You might be sitting in that exact position today, wondering if you are the problem, wondering if you just tried a little harder, sacrificed a little more, or shrank yourself a little smaller. They might finally love you the way you deserve. Hear me clearly when I say this. You are not the problem, and you cannot fix people who are dedicated to breaking you. If you are sitting at a table where you are being served disrespect, you do not have to eat it. You do not owe your sanity, your financial security, or your future to people who use the word family as a weapon to keep you compliant and small. You have the absolute power to change your reality. You can stand up by the building and evict them from your life completely. You can rewrite your entire narrative and surround yourself with people who recognize your immense, undeniable value. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? Tell me your story in the comments. Like and subscribe if you believe in protecting your peace at all costs. The harrowing journey of Cassidy and her husband Elijah serves as a masterclass in recognizing and dismantling toxic relationships. If there is one paramount lesson to be extracted from their ordeal, it is this: shared DNA is a biological coincidence, not a lifelong contract to endure disrespect. Society often conditions us to believe that we must tolerate endless manipulation under the guise of family loyalty. Cassidy's parents and sister weaponized this exact sentiment, using guilt and familial obligation to mask their financial extortion and emotional abuse. They demanded total submission while offering nothing but cruelty in return. However, the story forcefully dismantles the myth that we owe our sanity to the people who raised us. We learn that walking away from a toxic environment is never an act of failure, rather it is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Equally important is the beautiful realization that family can be chosen. While Cassidy's biological relatives plotted her ruin, her chosen family, Elijah, Devon, Grandpa William, and their loyal circle stood like an impenetrable fortress when the chaos hit. They didn't demand that she shrink herself to fit their egos. Instead, they empowered her to reclaim her narrative and fight back. They proved that true family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering support, and the courage to stand by your side during the darkest storms. You are never obligated to beg for a seat at a table where you are constantly being starved of love and validation. You have every right to build your own table. It takes immense courage to evict toxic people from your life, but the profound peace that follows is worth every difficult step. If you are currently pouring your energy into relatives who only tear you down, I challenge you to reevaluate your boundaries today and choose your own peace.